Chapter 845. Nothing will happen, said Jingjiu as he headed toward the deep part of the icy land. When the soles of the regular boots touched the hard ice and snow, they produced ripples soundlessly, like the petals falling on the surface of the water. Looking at Jingjiu's back, Ran Handong suddenly said, "I'll tell my father." This was the second time she had said this. Jingjiu didn't halt his steps, nor did he heed her. He kept walking forward. After a moment of silence, Ran Handong hastened her steps to catch up with him, saying nothing more. As long as her father and the authorities of the Federation of the Milky Way didn't make a decision, she was still Jingjiu's secretary and should do what she was supposed to do. This was what Jingjiu was most satisfied with about her. They didn't walk too far in the icy land before they saw the entrance. The bracelet gave off a detestable beeping sound as the passage was opened. The two of them arrived at the underground. The underground was not a top-secret military base, but a regular long corridor. The portraits and quotes of some famous people were hung on the walls on both sides of the corridor, with a brief introduction next to each portrait. It seemed that most of the tourists here were the primary students. This is the art gallery of the Milky Way. Today is the first day of the month, the closing day. Ran Handong said after shooting a glance at him, "I don't know why you two arranged to meet here. It might have something to do with the inheritance of the priest of the Stargate, but there are indeed many precious remains here." This art gallery was the most advanced place in the Federation of the Milky Way with the richest collections. Even the museums and art galleries in City couldn't compare to this place. Today was the day the library was closed. The usual stream of visitors and groups of students were nowhere to be seen. Only the dull footsteps of two people could be heard in the empty passageway. It didn't take long before they arrived at the contemporary art gallery. The space of the buildings here was more spacious and large. Outside the glass windows that looked like small hills was the monotonous, icy land, and the sky in the distance had a dark blue color. The works of art on display here were more varied than those in the previous galleries, and they were more difficult to understand and even a bit eerie for regular people. Ran Handong introduced the origin of the works of art and the common sayings of the critics, fulfilling her duty as a secretary and acting as a tour guide. Jingjiu didn't stop in front of the works of art to appreciate them, but he appreciated this young officer even more. It was not important whether Guqing could ascend or not. Since more than 1,000 years ago, the Federation of the Milky Way had ushered in an explosive period of technology and civilization. There would be new discoveries and new results every day. Every once in a while, a new mineral star would be discovered. The problem of energy exhaustion had long been solved. The difficulties of interstellar navigation had long been overcome by the rediscovery of the warped hole route and the comprehensive application of the gravitational field. It was not an exaggeration to say that although the current human society was not as glorious as the ancient civilization, it was already qualified to be called highly developed. As an accessory of the society, the arts had developed at high speed. Coupled with the pressure from the sea of dark matter on the other side of the universe, the art forms in the contemporary society had become more extreme and profound. If one were to abandon those forms of art, one might be able to discover the hidden richness and despair, the intense clash between life and death. At the far end of the contemporary art gallery was a deep blue swimming pool that looked like a clear sky. The pipes that filled the swimming pool poured out black oil stains. Accompanied by a low sound, the oil continued to hit the bottom of the pool, swallowing the blue tiles. Finally, it slowly sank into a hole in the distance, like a black hole swallowing everything. The direction of the black oil stains was simple and clear: death or the sea of dark matter. It was said that the crude oil from a certain planet was formed naturally by the plants billions of years ago during the geological changes, and was an important energy source for the ancient civilization. It didn't feel dirty, and it kept piling up and dripping down. Instead, it seemed to have some sort of order or regularity. This art installation was installed here 31 years ago. It caused a great controversy at the time, said Ran Handong. Jingjiu signaled for her to stop talking. Ran Handong understood something. She turned around and walked toward the contemporary art gallery after taking a glance outside. Jingjiu turned around and walked to the other side. The entire Milky Way art gallery was located under the ice sheet of the South Pole, and the contemporary art gallery was at the outermost part of it. There was a cliff outside of it. The bottom of the cliff was the famous low valley of the South Pole ice sheet. As far as the eye could see, there was endless ice and snow. The cliff itself was black, looking like the oil stains in the swimming pool. In other places on the main planet, like the capital city, the Priest Manor, and the meadow behind the mountains, the sky was occupied by the light of the stars, making it hard to see the blue color. The sky here was evidently different. It was blue, similar to the color of the tiles in the swimming pool. It had a sense of classical beauty, more like that of Chaotian. In places where the stars could be seen easily, people would look at the stars at night, but nobody would scream and scream in astonishment. They were used to it, so they didn't think much of it. In the eyes of Jingjiu, who was used to seeing the blue sea and the blue sky, the world in front of him consisted of nothing but the white snow and the black mountains. The black and white formed a perfect balance. Like the chess pieces on the chessboard he didn't like, they gave him a feeling that they were too stable, which he didn't like. At this moment, an extremely bright red color appeared in the dark world. The red color was not like the sword light of the thoughtless sword. It had a hint of blood. And it was not like the lava under the ground, which gave off a warm feeling. Jingjiu thought for a while, and remembered that it should be the color of the wildflowers by the cliff edge of Tianguang Peak. As he was thinking of all this, the red color came close and drifted with the wind, making a whistling sound, as if it had turned into a flag. The protective shield of the art gallery blocked the wind and snow outside. The red overcoat fell down, motionless. General Li looked at the world outside the cliff, the expression in his eyes profound and calm. He didn't say anything. Jingjiu didn't say anything either. It was deathly quiet outside the cliff. The sound of the wind and snow was heard outside. The sound of the oil falling into the swimming pool was heard inside. This was the cross-section of the South Pole ice sheet. The permanent star was on the other side of the black cliff. Though it couldn't be seen, one could still see the changes in the light it emitted. The sunlight had gradually shifted, and the permanent star rose higher and higher. It was noon, and the whole planet was at its brightest. The cities near the equator, even with the protective shields, would become extremely hot. It was probably because of the hot air that the snow and ice outside the cliff grew more violent, and the color of the sky grew fainter. It was amazing that the blue sky became transparent, and one could see farther away. Standing by the cliff edge, they looked at the dark universe on the other side of the transparent sky, the space warfare and satellites that seemed to be right in front of them, the battleships, and even the nearest planet. You should know what's going on in this world since you've been here for so long. General Li's voice was calm and profound, like the expression in his eyes, like the perfect sound of a bell. Jingjiu said, "According to the definitions in the science fiction and games, this is the main universe, and Chaotian is a time zone that drifts in the same orbit, but is independent of it." General Li said, "Some people like to use the concept of a bubble as a space zone. I agree with you more. This has nothing to do with the difference in the flow of time. It's because there is no clear boundary between the two worlds." Jingjiu said, "What I'm concerned about is, was Chaotian discovered by the god of the distant ancient civilization, or was it created by him? According to our understanding of the distant ancient civilization, that god didn't have the ability to create a world, so it should have been discovered by him in the universe." General Li continued, "Since the humans of the two worlds are of the same origin, Chaotian must have been designed by him." Jingjiu pressed, "The boundary between the two worlds can't be broken. How did he achieve all this?" General Li said, "The female priest didn't reveal any information about this." Jingjiu knew that the female priest generally referred to was not the priest scattered on more than 100 planets in the Federation of the Milky Way, but the one in particular. General Li pulled back his gaze and said calmly to Jingjiu, "I'd like to know what conclusion you have reached recently. More than 100,000 years ago, the dimensional barrier in the universe was torn apart due to the abuse of the gravitational field weapons or weapons of a higher state, and the distortion of the warped holes, and the dark matter came to the main material world. The human civilization was on the verge of destruction, that God had to choose between leaving this galaxy or fighting the sea of dark matter to the death. The distance between the galaxies was too far, and the distance was more dreadful than death. In the end, that God chose the latter option. However, he wasn't confident in his chances, so he wanted to leave a spark for the human civilization. It was then that he discovered the time zone where Chowtion was located, and he began to modify it. He brought the humans and some other life forms into that world, and he also put some replicas of the life forms infected by the sea of dark matter into that world, which are the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. On the one hand, he believed that the humans and other life forms could evolve into more powerful races in that world, and he hoped that the humans could find a way to defeat the sea of dark matter. This was the longest speech Jing Jiao had made in the last 1,000 years. His voice was devoid of any inflection, sounding like an emotionless robot, making the most boring narration and talking about the most boring things. In fact, these were the most important secrets of the human civilization and the most secretive truths. At least, they were close to the truth. Generally said after a moment of silence, "That's the gist of it." Jing Jiao looked at the distance. There was a dark universe, planets, permanent stars, nebulae, battleships, and other objects. Jing Jiao opened his eyes after closing them, saying, "In other words, we are all experimental subjects." Chapter 846. More than 100,000 years ago, the human civilization was on the brink of destruction because of the invasion of the sea of dark matter. At the time, the humans had only two choices. Since they couldn't surrender, they could only flee or fight to the death. Many humans left this galaxy and traveled to the distant and dangerous places. They might have found a new paradise, or they might have vanished soundlessly in the vast universe. For some reason, the majority of humans couldn't leave their homeland. In the end, they perished together with the sea of dark matter under the lead of that god. Now that he was a god, he must have predicted such a sorrowful outcome in advance. As such, he had to leave a seed for the human civilization, either spiritually or biologically. In addition to the remains of the distant ancient civilization that he had discovered and the humans who had reappeared in the universe like weeds, he had made some other preparations. Before the final battle, or maybe many years ago, he had found a space by the edge of the galaxy. That space was outside the real world, and its boundary was hard to cross. The laws of heaven and earth in it were special, and the flow of time was different. It was unclear how that god had brought the humans and many other life forms into that world, and he had duplicated some life forms that had been contaminated by the sea of dark matter. The humans who had reappeared there had taken a path different from the real universe after a long time and a different set of rules. That world could be said to be the last refuge of the distant ancient civilization, and it could also be said to be the catalyst for the evolution of the humans. According to the judgment of that god, the humans there would one day evolve and become the true super soldiers, breaking through the boundary and returning to the real universe. For that world, it was called ascension. For this world, it was called returning. Jing Jiao didn't have any proof, and he merely made the inference based on the information he had at hand. Yet, this was probably the historical truth. If this was true, many things in Chowtion would be meaningless. For many people, this would be a strong mental shock, and they would feel extremely frustrated and even hopeless. It was because everything they had believed in was unreal. The rose finch who lived eternally in the fire, the fairy world after ascension, and all the legends and legends were merely legends and legends. The existence of the beings and the purpose of their struggle were all arranged. As Jing Jiao said, they were merely experimental subjects. However, Jing Jiao and generally were quite calm. The ascendants were the true fairy men. They had a powerful will and spirit that the regular people couldn't even imagine. You can call it an experiment or a gu refinement, generally said. The monsters of the Snowy Kingdom in Chaotian were the replicas of the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter. This was the reason why Jingjiao had always felt familiar with the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter. The intention of the god was evident. He hoped that the new humans could find a way to deal with the Sea of Dark Matter. Maybe he wants us to get used to it before coming out. Jingjiao did not want to speak up for the god, but it was indeed a possibility. God is already dead. There's no point in revisiting the past. General Lee looked at the few battleships outside the atmosphere and said indifferently, "This world calls us cocoon breakers, and I like it very much. It's because we are the new humans that have evolved. We are stronger and more advanced than the humans here. Then we have the responsibility to lead the entire human race forward." Breaking out of the cocoon to become a butterfly was used in many literary works to describe metamorphosis and evolution. It was indeed more suitable to describe the Ascenders. Jingjiao felt that this was too childish. Perhaps the deceased god had thought so, which was why he said in his last words that a new god would come. Yet, he didn't think the Ascenders should think so. Anyone who thought of themselves as a god was insane in his eyes. "The only responsibility I'm willing to take on is to stay alive," said Jingjiao. Though this statement sounded selfish, it had a deeper meaning. General Lee reached out his hand and patted on Jingjiao's shoulder after a long moment of silence. Jingjiao didn't avoid his hand. General Lee's hand stayed on Jingjiao's shoulder. He looked at Jingjiao's eyes, his smile fading away. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. The new humans, after the evolution, must take on the responsibility unwaveringly and lead the humans forward. We have to admit bravely that we are the vanguard and the bright light of the human race. However, we have to make it clear that we can fight and die, but it has nothing to do with that god. It's our free will. Jingjiao understood what he said and thought it was sensible. General Lee pulled back his hand and turned to walk into the art gallery, without taking another look at Jingjiao. Jingjiao followed him back into the art gallery after standing on the same spot for a while. The black oil stains were still pouring into the blue swimming pool and then slowly sinking into the hole. General Lee stopped in front of a painting. Most of the painting was blue, like the swimming pool, which represented the ocean. The oil stains were floating on the surface of the ocean, and a bird was bobbing in it, covered with the oil stains all over its body. It looked extremely weak and hideous. The strokes of the painter's brush looked wild but very delicate. Judging from the messy feathers and the posture of the bird, it was evident that this bird couldn't flap its wings to fly away and was on the verge of sinking into the ocean. The blue ocean and the sky were the heaven and earth favored by the humans, and the black oil stains represented the Sea of Dark Matter. The bird was a life contaminated by the dark matter and could turn into a monster at any moment. "You should learn more about these black things," said General Lee. Jingjiao was well aware of this fact. He hadn't had any contact with the Sea of Dark Matter since he woke up in this world. If he were to do something about it, he had to learn more about it. The contaminated lives are still lives, but the most important thing is the blackness that has contaminated them. Those energies know nothing but swallowing and infecting. They have no emotions, no intelligence, and no need. Looking at the birds struggling painfully in the painting, General Lee went on, "If we have to use the objects of this world to describe them, the virus is the most suitable object." Jingjiao said, "If they are not of the same world, there is no special medicine for them." General Lee said, "As such, we have no choice but to use the high-intensity light and heat energy to clean them up, to deal with the threat of the Sea of Dark Matter. The most important thing is to isolate the black things. Like the oil stains on this patch of ocean, we need to use the foam barrier to stop them from polluting more of the surface of the ocean and contaminating more lives." "This is the Star Chain Plan," said Jingjiao. General Lee said, "The Star Chain Plan has been carried out for more than 200 years, but we have seen some results in the last 20 years. It's because the plan consumes too many resources, and the Federation of the Milky Way can't withstand the pressure, even though it has the ability to exploit the resources as a whole. Yet, the plan has to be carried out. As such, We have to control the Federation of the Milky Way completely. If he wanted to save a civilization, he would need the power of the entire civilization. First, he would need to control the civilization. That still made sense. This was the biggest difference between the Ascenders represented by General Li and the descendants of the ancient civilization represented by the priests. Both sides were arranged by the gods, and everyone had the same goal. However, as for how to do it and who should take the lead, they had been secretly fighting for many years. It had to be said that the humans were always uncreative, be it in the Federation of the Milky Way or in Chaotian, in the distant ancient civilization or in the interplanetary era. Generally said, starting from the founder, she wants to control all the Ascenders who come here because she thinks that she is the only successor of the gods and the ruler of human society, while we are just weapons left by the gods to her. What do you think we could do? Jing Jiu recalled the scene at the hot spring and fell silent. You should have guessed the origin of that priestess. She is just an artificial intelligence left behind by the ancient civilization. What right does she have to lead the entire human race? Generally said, she must obey our orders. This is not negotiable. I think you're all very naive, Jing Jiu commented bluntly. In his eyes, the so-called contest between the Ascenders and that being was no different from the debate about the sun among the children in the green sky mirror. He, Zhan, and the free-traveling practitioner Jiang hurt each other not because of the sun, but because of the excessive emotions of the intelligent beings. Are you willing to be someone's sword? General Li looked at Jing Jiu in silence, the expression in his eyes profound. Nobody, said Jing Jiu. General Li said while staring into his eyes, you don't trust us. Jing Jiu uttered, without hesitation. General Li pressed, is it because of the 2 assassinations? Or because of what happened in the CE Nebula? You should know that these are just routine inspections. I don't accept it, said Jing Jiu. General Li turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff outside the art gallery. It seemed that he brought Jing Jiu here to see the painting. You didn't finish what you wanted to say on the battleship the other day, and you met me today. What's next? The wind and snow outside the cliff suddenly grew violent. Chapter 847. The snowflakes rolled up by the wind blocked the scene outside the atmosphere, looking like Chaotian. Standing on the same spot, Jing Jiu said while looking at the back of General Li, I want an explanation. The gunshots in the square, the laser cannons heading toward the praying hall, and the battleship in the dark space all seemed to be an inspection in the eyes of General Li and others. Yet, he had said that he wouldn't accept it. Qisong has already been killed by you, said General Li. You asked the Grandmaster of the Bloody Demons to find Chao Yuan and then pick me up. You wanted him to die. Jing Jiu had said something similar before the battleship was destroyed and the immortal Qisong was killed. The immortal Qisong had a very high status in the cultivation world of Chaotian, and his cultivation state was also very high. It was not easy to kill him. Even General Li couldn't do it. If Jing Jiu's prediction was correct, he and Chao Yuan were doing General Li a favor by killing this person. It was not a big deal. My opinion is different from that of the great Grandmaster. I don't like these devil men of the deviant sections. But I just wanted to teach him a lesson this time. I didn't expect you to kill him directly. General Li continued. There are not many ascendants in Chaotian. We should cherish them. If you want to cherish them, why do you need to inspect them? Why did you attack Jian Shilai? Asked Jing Jiu. Like the last fugitives of the distant ancient civilization, those ascendants might not join our cause. They might leave. Looking at the wind and snow outside the cliff, General Li went on. If they left, they would be meaningless to this world. It would be a waste. Jing Jiu said, I believe that Chao Yuan and Jian Shilai won't show any intention of leaving. General Li said, but I have to make sure that they are obedient. Otherwise, if they join the Federation of the Milky Way, they might affect the overall situation. Why didn't Byron and that disgraced ferryman accept the inspection? Asked Jing Jiu. General Li said, they don't even have the courage to leave, so they are not qualified to accept the inspection. Jing Jiu said, it looks like you need some obedient fighters. Sorry, I'm not that kind of person. General Lee said, "You're wrong. It's Aoyama that needs some obedient fighters." Jing Jiao pressed, "If that's the case, why do you still bother me?" General Lee said, "Like I said, it's just a routine. The essence of human beings was not a repeater, but it was an endless cycle. The rising and setting of the sun, the rotating sea of stars, and the rules of history. Everything, be it on a daily or spiritual level, would always repeat itself until the end. Ascenders were able to break out of the cocoon because they could at least break through a certain fixed barrier for a certain period of time and break out of this boring cycle." General Lee didn't continue this topic. "You didn't kill Yin Mai. I have to thank you for that," he said before Jing Jiao could speak. He and the cocoon breakers in the Federation of the Milky Way didn't expect that Jing Jiao would go to Capital City directly after leaving the Stargate base and coming to the main planet, and then barge into the building of the military headquarters, causing such a commotion. "Adon's the Jing Jiao. Like Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao." General Lee wasn't surprised that Jing Jiao could figure out Shen Yimai's background, saying, "There is something wrong with his mind. You should give way to him." "I don't understand the thoughts of you young people," said General Lee after a sigh. "I don't understand the thoughts of you young people," said General Lee after a sigh. Jing Jiao asked, "How is the Jing Jiao now? How long will it take? Why?" According to the hidden rules of the cultivation circle in Chaotian, the cultivation practitioners wouldn't take on disciples or have descendants unless they were certain that they couldn't ascend or their lives were running out. The former had been changed a great deal by Taiping Jinren, but the latter had lasted until now. The Jing Jiao ascended 40,000 years ago, which was the standard time in the Federation of the Milky Way, was merely a few hundred years after the Grandmaster of Aoyama came to this world. Why did he have Shinyamai? Looking at the wind and snow in the sky, General Lee said worriedly, "The Jing Jiao is not in a good condition. He won't have much time left. He'll see you before he leaves." After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao asked, "Where is Chao Yuan?" "He should be recuperating at the forward base," said General Lee. "Shilai?" Jing Jiao pressed. General Lee said, "I did it myself. He was slightly wounded and is undergoing special training. He should come out soon." "It's good that he's still alive," Jing Jiao said expressionlessly. "Where is the immortal Tan?" asked General Lee. Jing Jiao countered with a question, "Haven't you found him yet?" "No," replied General Lee. "Maybe he hasn't come out yet," said Jing Jiao. Since the book titled The Path Toward Heaven was his own story, its accuracy could only be maintained until he ascended and left. He had no idea what had happened in Chaotian after his ascension, whether the immortal Tan had ascended or not, and what Chao Yuan and Jian Shilai were thinking and experiencing. "Do you have any other questions?" asked General Lee. "No," replied Jing Jiao. General Lee said, "I'll send someone to pick you up later." Jing Jiao uttered, and flicked his finger lightly. A sword fire left the tip of his finger and drifted into the blue swimming pool. The black and sticky oil started to burn fiercely when it came in contact with the sword fire, exuding a terrible burning smell. The automatic fire prevention device in the art gallery had detected the change of temperature and sprayed out the foam automatically, but it couldn't extinguish the flames. The foam fell toward Jing Jiao and General Lee, but they separated when they couldn't reach them, piling up on the floor like an ocean of clouds. It didn't take long for the black oil in the swimming pool to be burned away, and the pipe was blocked because of the high temperature. General Lee turned to fly toward the outside of the cliff after shooting a deep glance at Jing Jiao, disappearing into the wind and snow instantly. The line left by the red cloak looked like a bloody line in the sky. As the bloody line faded away, the front part of the line had already broken through the atmosphere, passing the space stations and battleships and heading toward the deep part of the universe. A black battleship was adjusting its posture slowly in the quiet space. A flat alloy device was retracted into the interior of the battleship soundlessly. The alloy device was neither a gravitational field generator nor a laser gun, and it was different from the powerful weapons commonly used by the military of the Federation of the Milky Way. It was unclear what it was. In the command room at the head of the battleship, a steady and slender finger left the red button. The owner of the finger was a middle-aged officer wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. The light from the permanent star outside the window passed through the glasses and fell on his eyes, reflecting a profound intent. Tom seemed to have slowed down a lot. The largest space station was the space laboratory of the Science Academy of the Federation, which looked like a huge metal building that had been pieced together randomly, emitting a dazzling white glow under the light from the permanent star. The old dean was walking slowly along the passage by the edge of the space station. His white hair seemed to be ablaze when it was illuminated by the light from the window. He pushed open the door and entered an ordinary room. After getting used to the change of the direction of gravity, he took out a chip and handed it over to the dean. An elegant middle-aged professor in his 30s took over the chip and said politely, "Thank you for your hard work." The Science Academy enjoyed a high status in the Federation of the Milky Way, and the dean was a very powerful man. It was unclear what information was contained in the chip and why the dean had to deliver it to the dean in person. It was unclear what the status of the middle-aged professor was, but the dean showed great respect to him, saying, "If you need anything else, just tell me at any time." Having said that, the dean turned around and left the room. He rubbed his eyes, which were stung by the light, and waved his hand to reduce the rate of light entering the space station. Then he turned around and took a look at the tightly closed door, revealing a self-mocking smile. In the room, the middle-aged professor started to read the information in the chip through the terminal. It was the detailed name list and personnel information of all the universities and academic institutions in the Federation of the Milky Way that were involved in the superparticle transformation of nuclear fusion furnaces. It didn't take long for his sight to fall on planet Tianpu and notice the professor, surnamed Go, from Northwest University of China. He had become a university professor from a lecturer in a training class in a few dozen days, which was rather eye-catching. It was a pity that Professor Go had left Northwest University of China a few days ago. It was said that he had returned to the main planet to visit his relatives, but who knew where he had gone? Looking at the photo in the file, the middle-aged professor curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a mild smile, saying, "He is indeed the son-in-law of the Bai family." He got up and walked to the bookshelf. He took out the book titled The Path Toward Heaven and started to read the content related to Yamatai. A moment later, he murmured to himself, "I'll go and take a look one more time." No sooner had he said this than he extended his right forefinger and wrote a talisman in the air. The talisman entered the signal collector and was enlarged to the large data processing equipment at the end of the laboratory. It was connected to the civil network of the interplanetary network and entered the game. Those battleships and space stations were like the decorations of the main planet, hovering in the space and silence. There was a small planet in the distance. The surface of the planet was densely covered with craters formed by collisions many millions of years ago. The depth of one of the inconspicuous craters was extremely dark and gloomy. It was difficult for the rays of the permanent star to reach there, and the temperature was very low. An old man with a gloomy expression was sitting in the shadow with his eyes closed. It was unclear how long he had been sitting there. All of a sudden, he opened his eyes and lifted his head to look at the patch of red in the sky, asking, "Do you really believe in him?" The atmosphere of this planet was very thin, making it difficult for sound to travel. The old man's lips were a bit dry, but his voice traveled to the highest point of the crater in an inexplicable way. Standing on the peak of the crater, General Lee turned his head to look at the main planet that looked like a snowball in the distance, saying, "He is a disciple of Aoyama, and this is a significant event for the entire human race. Why don't you believe in him?" The black spaceship left the icy land of the South Pole and headed toward the Priest Manor in the northern hemisphere after passing through the scorching sunlight. The spaceship didn't leave the atmosphere, so it couldn't travel at a high speed. The scenery outside the window could be seen clearly. Jingjiu wasn't in the mood to enjoy the scenery. He sat in the chair with his eyes closed, lost in thought. As the pure white, icy land was replaced by the blue ocean, Jingjiu suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "How many have come?" "The targets you asked me to monitor have moved 17 times recently." Staring at the data on the light screen of the terminal, Ran Handong said. "Two of them have come to the main planet. They should be outside the atmosphere." Today is February 13th, the day of Ning K's victory. Hope he can conquer heaven as soon as possible. In addition, Master Ruagan has published a new book counting the distinguished figures about the historical officialdom, the late Ming dynasty, and the dream of the Red Chamber. Those who like this kind of book should check it out. Thank you. Chapter 848. The game, The Path Toward Heaven, was Jing Jiu's declaration to the entire Federation of the Milky Way. He truly wanted to see the Snow Girl. In fact, this game was also a fish pond he dug and a wudong tree he planted. He wanted to see which fish was willing to swim over and eat the familiar aquatic plants, and which bird was willing to fly over and stand on a tree branch to look at the familiar scenery. There were thousands of suspicious accounts in the data provided by the Twirling Rain Company, and the suspicious ones were the symbols. Jing Jiu and Ran Handong analyzed the conditions offered to Ran Donglu by Jing Jiu and narrowed the range to 100 counts. In the end, Jing Jiu had determined more than 30 suspicious accounts and asked Ran Handong to monitor them in secret. Some of them must be the ascendants from Chaotian. When he met General Li that day, the digital symbols of two people appeared on the main planet. It was evidently suspicious. Jing Jiu looked at the outside of the window. The ring on his finger began to emit a faint glow, tracking the two digital symbols. His line of sight moved along with the symbols and eventually fixed on a battleship outside the atmosphere. The middle-aged officer on the battleship adjusted the silver-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose as he watched the light screen attentively. On the light screen was a black battleship moving forward slowly, seemingly motionless against the background of the ocean. Jing Jiu was on the black battleship. He didn't know that Jing Jiu was looking at him at the moment. Time passed slowly. A tiny whirlpool formed in the water in the glass cup. The middle-aged officer suddenly felt something was out of place. The ascendants were the true fairy men, so they had a keen sense of the changes in the energy of heaven and earth and a strong sense of danger, which was almost metaphysical. If he felt something was out of place, it meant that something was out of place, meaning that something was out of place. The water in the glass cup suddenly stopped flowing, as did his Tao heart that had calmed down again and his slender fingers. It was unclear when his finger had pressed on the red button again. It was so steady that it seemed that it would never be pressed down, or that it would be pressed down at any moment. The huge battleship adjusted its position along with the low hum of the electromagnetic interference. The mysterious and peculiar weapon underneath the battleship extended out soundlessly and aimed at the planet. Jing Jiu left the battleship and looked at the brightest star in the sky. It was not the permanent star, but the space station of the Science Academy of the Federation. The middle-aged professor was still in the game, The Path Toward Heaven, enjoying the lotus flowers on the surface of the lake in the 1,000-mile windy corridor. Having not seen the lotus for a long time, he still felt that the lotus was beautiful. The old scenery made him relax a little. If he was suddenly attacked at this time, he might not be able to react. But nothing happened. The book on the table moved without any wind and turned a few pages. So it's a saint. Jing Jiu pulled back his gaze and noticed that Ran Handong had been staring at his face. Ran Handong's face was very pale, even paler than when she guessed that he met General Li that day. Her eyes were filled with nervousness, and her lips were tightly pursed because she had guessed what he wanted to do at that moment. Today, General Li was prepared for the failure of the negotiation. If the negotiations between the two sides broke down, then war would ensue. This could also be seen as a threat. Jing Jiu would not accept it, so he made preparations in advance to counterattack at any time. He would use his divine sense to attack the professor through the Tao Toward Heaven game. Then, he would turn into a sword light and enter the gravitational field the moment the battleship activated its weapons, charging into the command room at the bow of the battleship. None of this happened. It was because he wasn't sure what the secret weapon of the battleship was. It was evident that it was not the base of the laser cannon or the nuclear bomb. Normally, it couldn't be the legendary neutron cannon, unless General Li didn't intend to destroy the main planet. Moreover, He didn't know where Generally was and whether Generally had any backup plan. No ascendant was more powerful than him. Though he was as confident as he was in Chao Tian, it didn't mean that he was willing to face such a dangerous situation. Most importantly, the negotiations between the two sides hadn't broken down yet. Why would he fight against his great grandmaster? Have you decided to accept their conditions? Ran Handong asked in a trembling voice. Jing Jiao uttered After a moment of silence, Ran Handong leaned against the back of the chair slowly, looking relaxed. It could be understood that she had given up all hope. "Why did you bring me here, then?" she asked angrily. "You're the secretary," said Jing Jiao. What he meant was that he was very lazy, so she was responsible for informing the government and the praying hall of his decision. And she was also responsible for explaining and dealing with others. Ran Handong didn't bother to say anything more. She curled her body into the chair and pretended to be asleep with her eyes closed. The spaceship sped up and soon flew out of the atmosphere. It was exceedingly quiet, drifting forward like the ashes of a piece of paper. In fact, it traveled at a high speed. A dozen minutes later, it landed on the lawn of the manor house. Different from when it left, it didn't conceal itself, attracting many gazes. The main preacher Tai Yang and the people in the praying hall watched in surprise as Jing Jiao walked down from the spaceship, wondering where he had been. After Jing Jiao returned to the small building, Zhong Lizi, who had finished her classes at the College of Priests, came over happily. She was surprised to find that Ran Handong was not there. "I've left," said Jing Jiao. There was no preamble or warning. It was just this sentence. Zhong Lizi was startled. She had expected this day, but she didn't expect it to come so suddenly. From the underground apartment to the University of Stargate, and then to this manor house full of green trees, she had a feeling that everything was not real. He would leave her one day, and the dream would come to an end one day. After a long moment of silence, Zhong Lizi asked, "Can you tell me your story?" That night, this youth knocked on her door and told her that he had seen the recruitment notice she had written on the internet and asked if he could move in with her. Zhong Lizi was aware that he was lying, but she didn't expose him. It was not because he had a handsome face, but because she was aware that everyone had their own difficulties and circumstances. She had neither asked him about his difficulties nor inquired about his background, but she wanted to hear it from his mouth that day. "The path toward heaven is my story," said Jing Jiao. Zhong Lizi remained silent for a long time with her head lowered. She had vaguely guessed the truth a long time ago, but she didn't want to think about it that way. It was because the truth was too shocking. He was not a person of this world. What could be more remote and despairing than this fact? "So, you are the Ascendant, the immortal Jing Yang." Zhong Lizi lifted her small face bravely and stared into Jing Jiao's eyes. "Did you come to our world to find those companions?" she asked in a trembling voice. Jing Jiao uttered, "Have you found them now?" asked Zhong Lizi nervously. Jing Jiao uttered him again. Zhong Lizi pressed, "Are you going to meet those people today?" Jing Jiao uttered him again. General Li was the immortal Chunyang. The organization of the Cocoon Breakers, or the Butterfly Association, the self-governing union of the Ascendants, was under his control. All of this was the will of the Grandmaster. The Aoyama sect ruled the Federation of the Milky Way. He was a disciple of Aoyama. He was the most outstanding disciple. He had already proven that Shun Yunmai was not as good as Jing Jiao. In other words, this vast universe and this civilization would belong to him in the future. What else could he say then? Well, it should be the case. "Is it safe to go there?" asked Zhong Lizi earnestly while looking at Jing Jiao. Jing Jiao suddenly felt touched. He curled up the corners of his mouth and uttered while rubbing her head with a faint smile. "I wish all the lovers in the world will be together forever. Even if they are separated for a while, their hearts should be together regardless of the method. I hope everyone will be happy." Chapter 849. Zhong Lizi was a smart girl. She knew that the story about the path toward heaven was true, so she had figured out many things, such as why her teacher thought Jing Jiao was the new god, why so many important figures had come to the mansion of the priest clan lately, why the capital city had been cordoned off that day, and why so many things had happened. The praying hall and those ascendants were competing for Jingjiao. Jingjiao had already made his choice. He and those ascendants came from the same place. In other words, they were from the same hometown. Jingjiao had told her about being a guest in a strange place and the anchor point. She understood his decision, but she was still worried. "Don't trust those people," she said. "I won't trust anybody," said Jingjiao. Zhong Lizi didn't feel disappointed by what he said. She asked nervously, "Can I go with you?" "No, you can't. Put away the paper crane I gave you. Tear it up or burn it when you're in danger." Having said that, Jingjiao came to the deck. Zhong Lizi knew that she couldn't change his decision, so she pouted her mouth indignantly. In the next moment, she came to his side with a cup of tea in her hand and handed it to him. Jingjiao took the teacup and took a sip, looking at the tree in the courtyard. Following his line of sight, Zhong Lizi saw Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi sitting under the tree. Jiang Yuxia was in a bad mood, saying something in a low voice. Hua Shi's eyes were wide open, showing an innocent expression. It seemed that she didn't understand what Jiang Yuxia had said. The lawn outside the courtyard was like a carpet, and the green trees formed a forest. All of a sudden, a gust of wind arose from the deep part of the garden, ruffling the treetops. It was thought that a floating train had arrived from the underground. In the next moment, a few floating cars and even 2 spaceships arrived at the manor. Ran Handong walked down from one of the spaceships and stood on the lawn, welcoming the important figures who had come from all over the place. The main preachers of the praying hall, the high-ranking officials of the government, the counselors of the management committee, the heads of various clans, and even Ran Donglu had come in person. "Take Major Ran with you. She can help you, and you need someone to take care of your life," said Zhong Lizi. Jingjiao didn't heed those important figures who had come to the manor. "I'll take Hua Shi with me," he said while looking at the 2 girls under the tree. Zhong Lizi was startled, wondering why it was Hua Shi. If Ran Handong's identity was inconvenient, Jiang Yuxia was also a good choice. Hua Shi was a cute and ignorant child. Even if she was a distant relative of the Hua family, how could she help you? "What's going on? Who did he meet today? General Li? This is impossible. That person met him a few days ago. Don't tell me he doesn't even have this much patience? This is betrayal." It was because Ran Handong told them what had happened that day that those important figures came to the mansion of the female priest. They wanted to know the truth of the matter, and they also wanted to change the direction of this story. Jingjiao didn't see them, not even Ran Donglu. However, no one dared to barge upstairs. Even the voices of questioning and reprimanding were very soft. That day, in the building of the military headquarters, even Shen Yunmai was almost incapacitated. Therefore, nobody dared to do anything to Jingjiao, not even to sound him out. Faced with an emotionless alloy wall, their fists had no choice but to pull back since they didn't dare touch it. The discussions in the grand hall grew quieter and quieter until it became absolutely quiet. The atmosphere was rather depressing. Dozens of gazes fell on Ran Donglu, hoping that this old man would say something. Ran Donglu didn't say anything, sitting in the chair expressionlessly. In fact, we can't blame him. The female priest didn't say anything to him after meeting him that day, and she didn't express her attitude. What could he do? Hua Shi said this to Jiang Yuxia in a low voice after taking a look at the scene downstairs. Jiang Yuxia let out a bitter smile, saying nothing. It was then that the door of the room was pushed open. Zhong Lizi motioned for them to come in. What was happening in the room was not the farewell ceremony, but the preparation for the departure, like packing the luggage. Jingjiao didn't have much luggage, so it was easy for him to pack. He liked the tea boiled in the iron kettle, but it was impossible for him to bring the kettle with him. All he needed were a few pieces of clothing. It didn't take long for Ran Handong to fold the blue hoodies neatly and put them into the black backpack. At this time, she was still playing the role of a secretary perfectly. She asked after some hesitation, "Do you need me to go with you?" Jingjiao shot a glance at Hua Shi, who had just walked into the room, and said, "I'll take her with me." Ran Handong felt surprised. Jiang Yuxia was quite surprised, wondering why he wanted to take her with him. Hua Shi was even more surprised. "Me?" she asked innocently while pointing at her own nose. Jing Jiao didn't explain the reason. While she looked at Zhong Lizi with a pitiful expression. She was Zhong Lizi's personal attendant. Zhong Lizi said apologetically. He said he would ensure your safety. Huashi said nervously, "Can I not? I have to ask my family for their opinion." "I'll ask them," said Jing Jiao. What he said had a hidden meaning, but Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia, and Ran Handong didn't figure it out. Huashi glanced at him angrily. It was unclear if it was because she was angry, but she wasn't as scared as before. She took the black backpack with a grunt and put it on her back. She turned around and walked out of the room after tying the two shoulder straps together. When Jing Jiao arrived on the Scorching Sun battleship, he attracted the attention of the whole world. The whole of the Federation of the Milky Way and the humans on hundreds of planets were amazed by his handsome appearance and guessed his origin. Yet, he kept a low profile when he left the main planet that day. It was not broadcasted live on TV, and no populace knew about it. Jing Jiao and Zhong Lizi walked to the other end of the lawn, and Huashi followed behind them with a backpack on her back. Only a few dozen people witnessed the scene, and they were all important figures in the Federation of the Milky Way. When they parted in the icy land of the South Pole, General Li said that he would send someone to pick him up. As the leader of the humans, he didn't lie, and he was very punctual. A dozen floating cars with the military insignia were parked on the other side of the lawn noiselessly. Dozens of soldiers of the Special Forces in full armor and mechanical armor were waiting for him. There were many trees in the middle of the lawn, some of which formed a forest and some of which stood alone. Jing Jiao and Zhong Lizi stopped short. They happened to be under a tree. It seemed to the young girl Hua she had a bad temper. She didn't heed them and walked into the floating car. She took off the backpack and tossed it carelessly at the end of the seat. The shade of the tree shone on Jing Jiao and Zhong Lizi, and the breeze blew over, making them feel very cool. It was a pity that it was not raining at the moment. Otherwise, it would be more similar to the University of Stargate. All the gazes, including the important figures of the government and the soldiers who came to pick up Jing Jiao, were fixed on this young man and woman. The first female priest of a commoner and the handsome youth who had a mysterious background but was also highly regarded by that person and generally at the same time were a perfect match for each other. If there were a story in this world, the male and female protagonists of the story should be like this. In fact, I like the novel you wrote very much. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and stared into Jing Jiao's eyes, saying earnestly, "I like Lien Sanyue, Zhao Liu, and the immortal Jingyang." "I know." Jing Jiao reached out his hand and rubbed her head. The dozen floating cars left the lawn and headed toward the outside of the manor house noiselessly, soon disappearing without a trace. It seemed that they were heading toward Capital City. The important figures had a complicated emotion, but they somehow felt more relaxed. The situation was still the same as before, but there was at least one benefit: peace. Many of them even thought that Jing Jiao had accepted General Li's invitation because of this word. The main preacher Tai Yang, the preachers from the Stargate base, and the Counselor Sha Yu maintained their bowing posture. Their way of thinking was different from those people. They still believed in Jing Jiao, thinking that this was a test from God. The path of life was long, like the passage between the stars and the ocean. Who could predict what would happen in the future? A dozen floating cars entered Capital City at a low altitude. The streets had been cleared out a long time ago, and the soldiers responsible for guarding the streets could be seen everywhere. The closer they got to the center of Capital City, the tighter the security became, and the more solemn the atmosphere became. The battleships outside the atmosphere could be seen clearly, and the platforms of the laser cannons could even be seen. Hundreds of combat mechas were hovering in the sky in silence, their weapons aimed at the building of the military headquarters. The internal structure of the building of the military headquarters had been repaired, but the traces of that day's battle could still be seen on the outer wall. The atmosphere in Capital City didn't become a bit more relaxed until the dozen floating cars entered the underground parking lot of the building one after another. The elevator arrived at the top floor of the building from the underground parking lot. Ding! The door of the elevator was opened. The middle-aged female officer by the surname of Chun was waiting outside. "General Lee is waiting for you," she said softly. She was even more polite than that day. Jing Jiu motioned for Hua Shi to wait for him outside and walked toward the office at the end of the metal corridor. Hua Shi felt restless, looking around curiously. It was unclear whether it was because the metal surface of the chair was too smooth and cold, or because she was nervous. There were books everywhere in the office, like the library of scripts on Shirua Peak. General Lee was reading a book while standing in front of a bookshelf. Hearing Jing Jiu's footsteps, he asked without raising his head, "The kid of the Hua family?" Jing Jiu uttered him. General Lee said, "It's an interesting choice." Chapter 850. Many people didn't understand why Jing Jiu chose to cooperate with the military and why he took Hua Shi with him instead of Ran Handong. He didn't reply to General Lee, because to reply would be to explain, and to explain would be to lie, and he was too lazy to lie. Well, the main reason was that he was actually very good at lying, but in front of people like General Lee, there would always be problems if he spoke too much. General Lee thought of another aspect. The Hua family is different from the other aristocratic families. They are very low-key and do not participate in many affairs. Only a few people know that they are very close to the priest. Jing Jiu uttered insincerely. General Lee put the book back on the shelf and asked, "I heard that you are very interested in that painting of sunflowers?" The happenings on the Stargate base couldn't be concealed from him, even though it was a private conversation between Jing Jiu and the priest of the Stargate. Jing Jiu uttered him again. "That painting is not in the art gallery, nor is it in the north. It is now in the Hua family." General Lee said, "Did you bring the Hua family's child to see that painting?" Obviously, he didn't believe that Jing Jiu's reason for bringing Hua Shi along was so simple and ridiculous. He believed that Jing Jiu still did not fully trust him and wanted to maintain the connection with the priestess. Jing Jiu didn't continue the topic, but brought up a completely different topic. The dark matter is not any known or unknown particle. The book that Li Jiang had just read was 7 Ways to Disperse Low-Velocity Neutrinos. He sighed and said, "There is a pessimistic theory in the scientific community that the existence of dark matter or dark energy is beyond the scope of human imagination." Jing Jiu said, "So humans need to evolve." General Lee looked at him and said, "We are all evolved humans." "Not enough," said Jing Jiu. General Lee said, "I hope you can still be as optimistic as you are now after you go to that planet." Jing Jiu asked, "Must we go?" General Lee said, "If you need this civilization to do something for you, then you should also do something for this civilization." Jing Jiu was silent for a while, then said, "I'll go to the Hua family first." General Lee said, "The fleet will wait for you." General Lee sent a car to the priest's manor to take Jing Jiu to the military headquarters building, which was a kind of announcement. He intended to let the entire Federation of the Milky Way know that this issue had been settled. In the future, the Federation of the Milky Way would operate according to the previous rules. The priests would do what the priests had to do, and the government would do what the government had to do. Now that the announcement had been made, there was no need to do anything else. Jing Jiu left the office with Hua Shi and took the elevator to the lobby of the military building. Then they walked out of the building. Throughout the entire process, countless gazes fell on him. Their gazes were filled with vigilance, hostility, and respect. A few days ago, Shin Yunmai was almost crippled by him here. Walking out of the military headquarters building, the combat armors in the sky had already scattered in all directions like a flock of birds. The few battleships at the edge of the atmosphere that brought about a great sense of pressure had also gone far away, and there were pedestrians on the streets again. Hua Shi carried her black backpack and quickened her pace to catch up with Jing Jiu. She asked, "Where are we going?" Jing Jiu answered, "The Hua family." Hua Shi said with her eyes wide open, "I've never been there. How can I take you there?" The relationship between distant relatives was quite remote in the interplanetary age, and they could even be separated by a few hundred light years. She grew up on the Stargate base, so it was normal that she hadn't had any dealings with the Hua family on the main planet. "Aren't you curious about it?" asked Jingjiao. "Hua," she said innocently. "Aren't they all people with 2 eyes and 1 nose?" There was a lake surrounded by mountains, which was similar to the lake in the north. There was no old city on the other side of the lake, nor was there a young girl in a bathrobe. There was only a castle. The castle was built with stones. It was not a remnant of the distant ancient civilization, but a replica. It gave off a gloomy feeling. It was unclear whether it was because few people visited it or the green vines that covered the walls. As Jingjiao and Hua, she arrived in front of the castle. The gate opened automatically. An old steward in a black formal suit bowed to them and said, "Welcome." This old butler, who was dressed in a black suit, had a head full of white hair. His every movement had a refined temperament, and his movements were very precise. Hua, she looked at him curiously while holding the shoulder strap of the backpack. The old steward said with a small smile, "I'm indeed a biochemical person." Hua, she stuck out her tongue and said apologetically, "I'm sorry." The old steward raised his right hand and said with a smile, "Due to some reasons, it's inconvenient for the master to come here. Please help yourselves." The Hua family was one of the most resourceful clans, so they knew the identity of Jingjiao. Jingjiao chose the military, not waiting for the message from the praying hall. Since the Hua family was close to that person, it was inconvenient for them to see him. However, it was evident that the Hua family didn't want to offend the military and Jingjiao, so they didn't refuse his visit. This castle was a replica, but the artworks inside were real. And they were not modern paintings, but mostly oil paintings from the distant ancient civilization. It didn't take long for Jingjiao to find a painting. The dozen sunflowers in the painting were so full that there was no gap between them, giving off a feeling that even if there was a lamp on the opposite side, the light wouldn't be able to pass through. More importantly, these sunflowers were evidently dehydrated, their branches and leaves a bit soft. Jingjiao had seen a replica of this painting in the art gallery in Shoer City. That replica had a very high status in the history of art in the Federation of the Milky Way, and this painting was an authentic one. When Jingjiao saw the replica, he thought that these sunflowers should be bound by something. Otherwise, they would fall down in all directions. After seeing the authentic painting of sunflowers today, he had finally found the answer. The sunflowers were bound by a piece of cloth, the edges of which were embroidered with a bit of blood. The sunflowers in full bloom, the weak branches, and the bloody laced cloth. This painting had the feeling of a young girl, but it was also bloody. It had a peculiar sense of beauty when all these scenes were put together. The space elevator seemed to be moving slowly, but it was actually ascending rapidly. The ground was gradually left behind, and the horizon in the distance had a clear arc. The atmosphere had been broken through, leaving behind a foggy horizon. Jingjiao and Hua, she walked out of the elevator and entered the space station. After passing through a straight passageway, they entered the interior of the battleship. Ding! The identities of the two were confirmed. Hundreds of officers stood up from their seats and gazed at them attentively. Then they saluted in tandem. Jingjiao noticed that some of the officers looked familiar, and then he found that this battleship was the Scorching Sun battleship. The captain of the Scorching Sun battleship came before Jingjiao and said with a complicated expression, "The investigation has been over for some time. We reassembled the day before yesterday, and nobody was left behind." The captain's face was a bit pale, and he was much thinner than before. It was evident that he had suffered a lot during the investigation. "What's your name?" asked Jingjiao. The captain stood at attention and saluted Jingjiao, saying tersely, "Captain of the Scorching Sun battleship of the second level, Jiang Zhixing, waiting for your instruction, advisor." The Scorching Sun battleship belonged to the Star Patrol fleet. Jiang Zhixing graduated from the military academy and didn't have any faction background. The news of what had happened in the building of the military headquarters had spread. He and the officers and soldiers of the Scorching Sun battleship were aware that they would have stayed in the military prison for the rest of their lives without Jingjiao's help. They might even have died quietly. They were very grateful and in awe of Jingjio. Those who could defeat Xin Yunmai were qualified to be respected by the whole universe. Jingjio asked, consultant. Only then did Jiang Zhixing realize that he had not been aware of this matter. He said, "You are now the chief advisor of the military ministry and have the highest authority. Both the Scorching Sun battleship and the authority of the military headquarters represented General Li's sincerity. This was also responsibility or karma, just like the word Aoyama." After a moment of silence, Jingjio asked, "Where is Shen Yunmai?" Jiang Zhixing said, "He has been demoted. He is now the commander of the Star Corps fleet." He noticed the little girl behind Jingjio and quickly waved his hand. Huashi was carrying a black backpack. She seemed to be exhausted. A secretary stepped forward, wanting to take it for her, but she refused. The Scorching Sun battleship left the space station and joined a few other battleships in the distance, forming a simple formation and heading toward the deep part of the dark and gloomy universe. The destination of the fleet was the Jelly Star region. Its sole task was to escort the chief advisor of the military ministry, Jingjio, to observe the sea of dark matter. Standing by the window and looking at the stars in the dark universe, Jingjio remained silent. Back when he was on the journey from the Stargate base to the main planet, he often stood by the window and looked at this patch of universe. The battleship was still the Scorching Sun battleship, and it was still the same room and the same large floor-to-ceiling window. The universe outside the window didn't seem to be any different. It was the same black screen with countless stars on it. Yet some things had changed. He had never seen these stars before, and he wondered what the sea of dark matter looked like. In addition to that, there were other changes. Huashi came to his side and asked while looking at the starry sky outside the window, "Now that you want to rely on General Li, why did you oppose him? Did you want to prove your ability? Why did General Li dare employ you? Sometimes I really don't understand you people. What are the masters thinking? You were the enemy a moment ago, and now you have suddenly become a comrade. What's the difference between this and playing house?" Jingjio didn't pay any attention to her. Huashi continued after shooting a glance at him. "Even if you have other ideas, you don't have to go there." "I want to see it," said Jingjio. Lien Sanyue had told him that he wanted to see the sun after coming to the human world. He told Zhao Leu that the purpose of cultivation was to attain immortality. But the purpose of immortality was not to enjoy life. It was to see more sceneries. After coming to this world, he often looked at the stars, the battleships, and surfed the internet. It was because these were new sceneries for him. The Sea of Dark Matter was also a sceneries. Those planets that were different from each other were also sceneries. For instance, the planet in front of him was very small, with craters everywhere on its surface. Jingjio asked while looking at a crater, "Can you kill people?" Huashi opened her eyes wide, unable to understand what he was talking about. "I mean, can you kill people yourself?" Jingjio pressed. "It's against the law," said Huashi with a baffled expression. "It's also against the law to clone people," said Jingjio. Huashi opened her eyes wide, looking extremely innocent. Chapter 851. By the time the Scorching Sun battleship disappeared into space, the crater on the planet had turned to the side facing away from the permanent star. The bottom of the crater had no sunlight and was extremely cold to begin with, and the temperature was unimaginably low at the moment. The gloomy old man opened his eyes slowly and looked at the dark and gloomy space above, a hint of bewilderment and shock showing in his grayish eyes. Previously, he had sensed an extremely powerful and sharp divine sense, which had a very clear warning within it. He couldn't figure out how the other party had discovered him, and he couldn't figure out why the other party's sword wills were so powerful, even though they had just ascended not long ago. The planet was actually very far away from the Scorching Sun battleship. Even the imaging system on the battleship couldn't capture a clear image of it. There was another reason why Jingjio could see the crater. His gaze didn't stay on the crater for too long, because he had more important issues to deal with, like getting an answer from Huashi. Huashi felt uncomfortable being stared at by Jingjio, asking, "Do you want some tea?" "I don't have an iron kettle," said Jingjio. Huashi curled her lips and said, You have no idea how much they love you. It was interesting that Zhong Lizi and Ran Handong did put the iron kettle into their backpacks when they packed their luggage. It was why the little girl had such a hard time carrying it. The iron kettle was placed on the electromagnetic plate, and the clear water was poured into it, waiting to be boiled. A few green tea leaves were placed on the ceramic plate in silence. Jingjiu looked at her in silence. Huashi was a young mistress of an aristocratic family on the Stargate base and a distant relative of the Hua family on the main planet. She was a talented young woman, and her talent was quite good in the eyes of the human society. When she participated in the selection of the priest of the Stargate, she was liked by many people on TV because she was naive and adorable, with a kind of naive and clumsy attitude. If you were to take her to the amusement park to play or to make a bed with her, this little girl would be a good choice. However, Jingjiu was going to the sea of dark matter this time, and the journey might be dangerous. Why would he bring her along? The sound of water in the iron kettle grew louder, and the room grew quieter. Huashi asked in a low voice, "How did you know someone was there?" Jingjiu said, "That person's cultivation state is very high. His killing intent was suddenly released, and I felt it." Huashi didn't understand and said, "I've only seen killing intent in novels. Is it real? Is that a kind of information wave or a particle current?" Jingjiu said, "I think it's the observer effect." Huashi curled her lips and said, "It's not fair to explain the story of the macroscopic world with quantum physics." Jingjiu said, "Then there is no explanation." Huashi raised her head, looked into his eyes, and asked seriously, "Since you know he's there and he wants to kill you, why don't you kill him?" Regardless of whether it was the warship or the Reverend Qi Song, or the building of the military department or Shenyun Mai, all of them proved that Jingjiu was a man who appeared calm, but was actually extremely crazy. In order to ensure his safety, when he felt danger, he would definitely counterattack immediately, no matter who the other party was, no matter what the situation was at that time. Jingjiu said, "You said that murder is against the law." The extremely cold and hard killing intent clearly indicated the identity of the swordsman at the bottom of the circular mountain. It had been 9,000 years since the stone man on Mount Shenwu attained the Tao and ascended. That person had a very high cultivation state, and his killing intent was natural. The cultivation method he practiced was also very special, which made him more powerful in the extremely cold space. But that person's head was made of stone, and he was slow and clumsy, so he couldn't pose a threat to Jingjiu. Jingjiu sensed his killing intent and warned him not to follow him. It was because he found it troublesome, and he didn't want the scorching sun battleship to meet with any mishap. Of course, if Huashi was willing to help him, he wouldn't mind killing this person. Hearing his answer, Huashi felt it was rather childish, pouting. It was then that the water in the iron kettle boiled. She picked up a few tea leaves and threw them into the kettle. The steam rose up. A few leaves were bobbing up and down on the surface of the water. The steam was occasionally dispersed by the wind, exposing the eaves, the stone statue, and a well-trimmed short plank. Kneeling on the futon opposite the hot spring, Ran Donglu said in a low voice, "General, he should be Jingjiu's division commander. We shouldn't have high hopes for him." The cool breeze passing through the forest blew away more of the fog, gently ruffling the bathrobe with embroidered flowers and her neat black bangs. The young priest raised the porcelain cup with 2 fingers and brought it to her lips. She drank up the strong wine in the cup slowly and sighed delightfully, saying, "He is a cocoon breaker after all." Ran Donglu lowered his head and said, "The cocoon breakers are indeed powerful, but if you ignore the rules, we can still try to kill them all." The young girl put down the porcelain cup in her hand and looked at the fog above the hot spring, her eyes somewhat vacant, saying, "I didn't set the rules, so how can I ignore them?" Ran Donglu lowered his head even more, and so did his voice, saying, "God has been dead for many years." The young girl's eyes gradually focused and became extremely cold, saying, "The rules weren't set by him, so what's the use of his death? You're dismissed." Ran Donglu didn't dare stay any longer. He got up from the futon and backed out of the courtyard slowly with his body hunched. The wind stopped blowing. The hot fog of the hot spring grew thicker, flowing everywhere like milk. Looking at the sky, the young girl pouted and remarked in a bored manner, "You've guessed it so quickly. It's really boring." In the days that followed, Jingjiu lay in the chair and looked at the scenery of the universe outside the window, neither sleeping nor speaking. He didn't mention anything about killing people or cloning people to Huashi anymore. One day, the ring on his finger emitted a faint glow. His awareness entered the interplanetary network and arrived at the deep end of the hidden network, sitting in the room on the sky wheel. Sitting in the chair, Ran Handong sent a few pieces of data to Jing Jio, saying, "Among the 37 targets under surveillance, nothing special has happened. The person in the space station of the Science Academy left last night. His destination might be the same as yours. The other person is in your fleet." Jing Jio backed out of the interplanetary network after copying the data. The ascendant from the space station of the Science Academy should be the 7th house master of Yamatsai, Zhengju. His line of sight fell on a distant corner of the universe outside the window. The battleship looked like a small wooden stick in the vast universe. It was unclear who the ascendant hiding on a battleship was, but he shouldn't be someone from Zhongzhou School. Based on the style of the Grandmaster and General Li, the ascendants from Cloud Dream Mountain would have been killed by them a long time ago. The stone man from Chinwu Mountain was intimidated by Jing Jio and didn't follow him. By the time he arrived at the Sea of Dark Matter, he would have to deal with the ascendant, Zhengju, Shun Yunmai, and General Li at the same time. All of a sudden, the small wooden stick in the distance was ablaze. In the next moment, the stars in the dark universe grew dimmer. Tens of thousands of burning flying swords were traveling in the distant sky. They were tens of thousands of battleships. They were the largest and most powerful Starcore fleet. Jing Jio had witnessed such a spectacular scene from a distance many years ago when he ascended for the first time. He had finally seen it again that day. Jing Jio stood up and walked to the front of the window. He looked at those battleships in silence, his expression grave. It was not fear, but respect. After the fall of the distant ancient civilization, the human society had embarked on 2 different paths according to the arrangement of that god. If Jing Jio represented the highest peak of the path in Chaotian, this magnificent fleet of battleships represented the highest peak of the interplanetary civilization. Tens of thousands of battleships combined could easily destroy the union of dozens of planetary systems and travel unhindered in this part of the universe. The foundation of the human civilization had moved from the surface of the planet to the space. With these battleships, there was no need to worry about what the important figures and officials of the Federation of the Milky Way were thinking. As such, the true leader of the Federation of the Milky Way was General Li. It was the ascendants who controlled this civilization. "Do you think it's spectacular?" Huashi asked Jing Jio as she walked to his side. Jing Jio uttered, Huashi went on with a faint smile. "You haven't seen it before, have you?" "Yes, I have," replied Jing Jio. Huashi felt surprised. Jing Jio said, "You should have read that book, so you should understand what I mean." Huashi looked at him with wide eyes and asked confusedly, "Sometimes I really don't understand what you are thinking about. Do you really come here just to enjoy the scenery?" "Back then, I thought I saw tens of thousands of burning flying swords, and those sword currents could wipe out a civilization easily. But now I know it's not real." After a moment of silence, Jing Jio continued, "We have been cultivating for a great many years, and all we want is to ascend. But now we find that it's not real. Do you have a feeling of unreality?" asked Huashi. Jing Jio said, "It's indeed unreality, but it's also interesting." "Do you like this world?" asked Huashi. Jing Jio said, "There is a large universe here, with countless real stars and seemingly endless fairy energy. But I still don't like it." Huashi asked after some thought, "Is it because there's no one you like? Do you still miss that world?" "No," said Jing Jio. "It's because this world has an end according to the current rules of physics. The universe would perish in the end. Everything had an end. It was the same for existence." A similar conversation had taken place by the hot spring. Shun Yunmai cried bitterly by the hot spring for the same reason when he was a child. A shrill alarm suddenly rang out on the scorching sun battleship. Huashi looked out the window. Jing Jiao turned around and went somewhere. It didn't take long for the alarm to die down, replaced by the sound of zither. In the human society of the interstellar era, it was rare to hear such ancient and flowing zither music. The officers and men on the battleship came to the window and looked out along the sound of the zither. An ancient zither was floating in the dark universe. Shun Yunmai sat cross-legged behind the zither, plucking the strings with his fingers. His white robe reflected the distant starlight, looking like a ferryman. There was no air in the universe, so how could the zither sound be heard? It was unclear why the starlight moved, but Jing Jiao showed up in front of the zither. Wearing a blue hooded sweatshirt, he looked like an ordinary youth, but he immediately stole all the splendor from his opponent. Chapter 852. The zither music passed through the empty space and the alloy body of the battleship, reaching everybody's ears, including Jing Jiao's. The zither music was very moving, but it was not a music of this world. The rhythm was comfortable and bright, revealing a joyous feeling of a rainy night in spring. It was as mild as water and as precious as oil. I don't know what the song Leading the Romantic Night is like, so I wrote one myself. Do you think it's similar? Shun Yunmai lifted his head and asked Jing Jiao. There was no air in the universe, but his voice was like the music of the zither. It could be heard by the listener or the other party's awareness, regardless of the medium. I'm not sure, replied Jing Jiao. The young master Li had played Leading the Romantic Night many times at the 3000 Nunnery in Chaotian. Lien Sanuel listened to it attentively, but Jing Jiao didn't pay much attention to it. Lien Sanuel's zither music at the Plum meeting was probably like this. She's really unromantic. Shun Yunmai went on sentimentally. The young master Li is pitiful, and so is Lien Sanuel. Jing Jiao retorted after a moment of silence. You know nothing. Shun Yunmai was neither angry nor mad. He said leisurely while stroking his temples, I've read The Path Toward Heaven a few times. The story is not new, but it's interesting. It's because your world is interesting to begin with. Many people in the upper echelons, including Ran Handong, were well aware that this young master of an honorable status liked the old-fashioned stuff the most. His way of doing things was also quite old-fashioned, except that he was more crazy, casual, messy, decisive, and shameless. It was natural for him to be interested in Chaotian. It's because of the geological structure, said Jing Jiao. What he meant was that Chaotian and the Federation of the Milky Way were similar in nature, except for the difference in the scenery and the people. Shun Yunmai said with raised eyebrows, Your primitive imagination and fear of the outside world are a bit stupid, but the sense of security brought by the self-enclosed world is something we don't have here. Jing Jiao didn't like talking, save for a few people, such as Zhao Liu. But he liked Shun Yunmai a lot, so he was willing to talk to him. There's Aoyama over there, and there's also Aoyama over here. As long as we don't look beyond the boundary, it feels about the same. Upon hearing this, Shun Yunmai was intrigued. He asked with a gleam in his eyes. The old guy said that there are at least 2 or 3 sects in Chaotian that are as powerful as Aoyama, like Cloud Dream Mountain and Guocheng Temple. But according to your book, have you dealt with all of them? Jing Jiao uttered, Shun Yunmai sighed with emotion and said, You have done what the old guys couldn't. You are indeed much stronger than them. Jing Jiao said, Yes, I'm the strongest. Even the coldest universe could not be colder than this sentence. If it were someone else, he might have opened his mouth and did not know how to react. However, Shun Yunmai seemed to take it for granted. He was completely suppressed by Jing Jiao during the battle in the building of the military headquarters, and he did not have any chance to take advantage of the situation. Of course, Jing Jiao was the strongest in the universe. That's why the old guys decided to hand over this world to you. However, you should be aware that they gave you the right of authority because they hoped that you could do something for them. The future leader of the humans has to do something for the humans. It's no different from doing business. Shen Yunmai's hand left the zither, but the strings of the zither were still bouncing, giving off a pleasant sound. The dim light of the distant permanent star fell on the strings of the zither, turning into fainter broken glows. "I'm just going there to take a look," said Jingjio. "The Jelly Star region is not the destination. The Sea of Dark Matter is where you're needed. It's very dangerous there, and you might die there." Shen Yunmai laughed heartily. His smile was a bit strange, like that of a clown with lipstick. However, it was not a curse, but a joyful and expectant smile. Jingjio knew that Shen Yunmai had heard the conversation between him and Hua Shi. Jingjio recalled what the young priest had said by the hot spring a few days ago. Shen Yunmai had been thinking about life and death since he was 5 years old, but he hadn't found the solution. As a result, he had become like this. Jingjio looked at Shen Yunmai and said earnestly, "I won't." Shen Yunmai said more earnestly, "Everybody will die." Jingjio didn't want to repeat the meaningless discussion, so he asked, "What's the matter?" The remaining heavenly demons in the Jelly Star region had been wiped out, but why didn't the Central Star Fleet return to the main planet region, but wait for Jingjio here? "The fleet will take you to carry out a new mission. I have to give you some information about the Sea of Dark Matter in advance." Shen Yunmai took out an object and handed it to Jingjio, saying, "Less than 5 people in the Federation of the Milky Way are qualified to read this information. You have to be careful." The Scorching Sun battleship sped up. It didn't take long before it joined the Central Star Fleet along with a few other battleships. It was impossible to see the landscape of the mountains in the mountains. As they came to the fleet, the tens of thousands of burning flying swords turned into tens of thousands of bright stars, and the universe became the moving background. The peaceful and stable sea of stars was boring. Jingjio stopped looking at the scenery outside the window and started reading the object given to him by Shen Yunmai. A large amount of data poured down on the light screen like a waterfall. Innumerable complicated three-dimensional diagrams and microscopic images flashed incessantly, all of which were related to the Sea of Dark Matter. The Federation of the Milky Way kept the information about the Sea of Dark Matter strictly. Even Hidden Network didn't have too much of it. This was the first time Jingjio had seen it. The Sea of Dark Matter was the ocean of dark matter, which had existed in the universe for more than 100,000 years. The dark energy swallowed the galaxy slowly and turned all the life forms it encountered into monsters. The distant ancient civilization had been destroyed in this catastrophe. Now that the civilization had recovered, this was the most urgent problem to be solved. It was ridiculous and despairing that the humans knew very little about the dark matter, even though they had studied it for many years. There were 2 guesses about the dark matter. One of them was that the dark matter was a kind of weak force particle or a slow neutrino. The problem was that neither the distant ancient civilization nor the current Federation of the Milky Way had been able to capture or observe these tiny particles. The Federation of the Milky Way had spent a great deal of resources to build the strong magnetic binding accelerator around the nebula more than 10 years ago, but it hadn't discovered anything yet, much to the disappointment of the scientists and the populace. The other theory was that the dark matter or the dark energy was an existence that had nothing to do with the physical rules of the main universe. The human brain structure and logic were based on the physical rules of the main universe, so they had no way to understand the dark matter or the dark energy. However, this theory was like a theme that often appeared in the science fiction. It seemed sensible, but it was utterly meaningless. As such, the humans could only learn about the Sea of Dark Matter indirectly through those living beings and monsters that had been infected by the dark matter. The materials given to him by Shen Yunmai included the history of the Sea of Dark Matter and the relevant research results of the scientific circle, including those monsters. Those grotesque, dark, and gloomy monsters had some interesting names, which seemed to be words taken from the classics. It didn't take long for Jingjio to finish reading these materials. His line of sight fell on the encrypted file at the end of the materials, remaining silent. Only 5 people in the Federation of the Milky Way were qualified to know this secret. That secret was a city. Jingjio walked to the window and looked at the stars in the sky. The Central Star Fleet had already arrived at the edge of the galaxy and was on its way to a farther place. There was no twisting passage here, so it would take 17 days to accelerate. The speed of the battleships grew faster and faster. The stars that could be seen clearly at the moment were the lights at the end of the battleships. The real stars had already disappeared behind them. The alarm suddenly rang out and then disappeared. The scene in front of the fleet and a few lines of words appeared on the light screen. 3 mining ships had appeared in front of the fleet. Hundreds of laser guns shot out at the same time, emitting a bright light beam. It was unclear which mining company the 3 mining ships belonged to, but they turned into green smoke and dissipated in the vast space. The people on the mining ships were all dead. The route of the fleet was broadcasted to the whole galaxy. For some reason, those mining ships didn't evade the fleet in advance. As such, they had no choice but to suffer such a fate. Tens of thousands of battleships were accelerating. It was impossible to change the course or decelerate. In other words, it would be a waste of a great deal of resources. Everything in front of the passage of the Central Star Fleet would be destroyed. The civilization as a whole was moving forward, and any individual blocking its way would be crushed. Faced with tens of thousands of battleships, even the swordsmen in the inherited Night State and Jingjiao in the Federation of the Milky Way had no choice but to evade them, to say nothing of those few mining ships. Jingjiao was well aware of this, but he thought of Zhong Lizi's father. The mining ships invested in by that professor had probably disappeared for the same reason. This was a trivial matter for the universe, but it was different for the girl with a terminal illness. 27 standard days later, the Central Star Fleet arrived at the edge of the galaxy. It was said that this place was the place where the distant ancient civilization had started. It was an empty graveyard at the moment, so dark that it made people feel depressed. Tens of thousands of battleships were waiting in the dark space. They were the Star Chain Fleet. The 2 fleets joined together and turned into countless stars, representing the human civilization glowing in the universe. The Federation of the Milky Way had no intention of fighting the sea of dark matter. It was merely a rehearsal for the plan to seal off the sea of dark matter. The Scorching Sun battleship slowed down along with the Star Fleet. It became stationary 4 hours and 37 minutes later. A dark permanent star hung in the distant space in silence, on which some flames could be vaguely seen. The surface of the star was covered with a layer of solidified ash, as if it would be extinguished at any moment. This place was the edge of the galaxy and the edge of the sea of dark matter. The permanent star was the evidence. There was a planet on the dark permanent star, on which was a city of the distant ancient civilization. It was the place Jingjiao intended to go to. Chapter 853. The Star Chain Fleet and the Star Core Fleet kept on advancing toward the sea of dark matter. The burning battleships didn't pay any attention to this black permanent star that seemed to be on the verge of dying. Like everything else in the universe, the permanent stars would experience the process of birth, growth, evolution, and death in the end. In comparison to the humans and other life forms, the permanent stars had many ways of dying. However, the way of death of this permanent star was evidently special and unnatural, as if it had been extinguished by an external force. It was because of the long distance that Jingjiao couldn't see clearly what the solidified ash layer covering the surface of the permanent star was, but he guessed that it might have something to do with the dark matter. This was the edge of the sea of dark matter, where the dark and the light were engaged in the final battle. There seemed to be nothing in the vast and empty universe, but it was full of a suffocating smell. The suffocation was mostly due to the absence of anything, not because of the great pressure from the outside world. The Scorching Sun battleship halted in the outer space of the black galaxy, illuminating the universe a bit. Some cracks in the space and turbulence of particles could be observed. These were probably the remnants of the explosion of tens of millions of huge nuclear bombs. Judging from the intensity of the radiation background, the explosion should have occurred during the period of the distant ancient civilization more than 100,000 years ago. His ring emitted a faint glow as he kept in touch with the battleship and received all sorts of data. The light in the transport spacecraft was gentle and bright. Neither Hua, Xin nor the biochemical officer noticed it. By now, Jingjiu realized that the grave-like universe outside the window was the most important star region of the distant ancient civilization. It was interesting that Chaotian was on the other side of this graveyard. The black planet was getting closer and closer, and the atmosphere grew increasingly depressing. Gradually, they could see the scene of a civilization that looked like a withering flower outside the spacecraft. The transparent objects that looked like thin wings were dyed black, looking like moths flying in the sky. It was unclear what system they belonged to in the distant ancient civilization. Many other objects resembling the Stargate in the science fiction were floating outside the atmosphere of the black planet. The gray materials used to construct the space gates had countless black spots on their surfaces, looking like rotten mushrooms. There were many spores drifting in the atmosphere, looking like smoke. The regular humans couldn't see those tiny spores, but they couldn't evade the surveillance equipment on the spacecraft and Jingjiu's eyes. The spacecraft made some cracking sounds as it withstood the impact of the smoke. The surface of the spacecraft didn't show any sign of being polluted. It seemed that the spores had lost their vitality. The whistling of the wind replaced the sound of the impact, indicating that the density of the atmosphere was getting higher and closer to the ground. The mountains, valleys, and plains had been infected by darkness for many years, and then eroded by wind and rain for more than 100,000 years, adding a sense of desolation. From afar, the forest and grassland were black under the dim light, like an ink painting. The spaceship cut open a passage in the atmosphere. The wind howled far away, and the black forest shook, throwing out countless black powder. There were no tall buildings on the surface of the planet, only thin ribbon-like pipes connecting countless buildings floating in the air, just like the relationship between blood vessels and muscles. Most of the pipes were broken or collapsed, and the buildings were in ruins. It was impossible to tell what they looked like in the past. Not long after, the spaceship arrived at the wasteland at the north pole of the planet. The ground here was covered with a gray substance, and a ring-shaped base was built there. The perimeter of this circular base was at least 400 kilometers. It was incomparably huge. Looking from the sky, it looked like a crater that had been bombarded by an asteroid. The ring-shaped base had a gravitational field of the highest energy level, which could be clearly felt even from far away. Washi glanced at Jingjiu, but she did not detect any change of emotion on his face. The spaceship landed in the ring-shaped base. It was as quiet as a speck of dust falling into a porcelain plate, and it did not attract any attention. Two military officers walked out of the ring-shaped base to welcome Jingjiu and his companions. It was then that another spaceship broke through the atmosphere and flew over, followed by the sound of zither. Washi could not help but frown. Shun Yunmai walked down from the spaceship, followed by two young men dressed like little Taoist children, who held a zither and a sword in their arms. It was absurd to see such a scene on the planet left behind by the distant ancient civilization, in a ring-shaped base and under the protection of the gravitational field. "Nice to meet you, Advisor Shun." The two military officers stood at attention and saluted Shin Yunmai excitedly. Shin Yunmai said expressionlessly, "He is now the chief advisor of the military, and his rank is higher than mine." The two military officers came back to their senses and said to Jingjiu, "Nice to meet you, Mr. Advisor." Having said this, they turned to Shin Yunmai again and said in a louder voice, "Nice to meet you, Commander." Though Shin Yunmai was the commander of the Star Fleet, his authority was not as high as Jingjiu's. He waved his hand disinterestedly and led the two children toward the base. "Say, let them show you around first." This galaxy was probably the birthplace of the distant ancient civilization, or at least it had been an important residence for the humans of the distant ancient civilization. The mortals in the Federation of the Milky Way had no idea about this planet and the ring-shaped base. There were only a few traces in the hidden network. The city recorded in the top-secret information was located outside the ring-shaped base. This planet was the place where the distant ancient civilization was first occupied by the sea of dark matter, and the city was the place where the dark night first appeared. The life forms infected by the dark night turned into the monsters of the sea of dark matter, and they began to slaughter and swallow the living humans and other life forms. The whole city and even the whole planet had turned into a hell. It was unknown what method the ancient civilization had used to isolate the planet, sealing off the monsters and the humans who were still alive. More than 100,000 years later, the new humans found this planet according to the clues provided by the female priest. They landed in this city and found to their surprise that it was still the same as it had been more than 100,000 years ago. It seemed that the monsters of the sea of dark matter, the process of the infection, and the horrible scenes were still taking place. As far as the humans were concerned, this was the most precious first-hand information. Through the observation and study of this planet, they had a deeper understanding of the sea of dark matter and those monsters, and they had more methods to exterminate these monsters and prevent the contamination of the planet. To avoid causing a panic, the government of the Federation of the Milky Way guarded this planet closely. Only the soldiers who had passed the strict examination were allowed to enter the base. The research institute under the base was even more heavily guarded. Many researchers had never returned to their hometowns after coming here. The former director of the Research Institute was the current president of the Science Academy of the Federation. Shinyan Mai had worked here for half a year. Normally, this planet should be safe at the moment, but the military and the Research Institute were still observing and experimenting around the base cautiously, not daring to go too deep into the base. The monsters of the sea of dark matter didn't need energy to survive. No matter how powerful the distant ancient civilization was, they couldn't guarantee that they wouldn't hide in the deep part of the ground, waiting to wake up one day. Jing Jiao had read the information and didn't need the introduction from the officer, but he didn't stop the officer from talking. Otherwise, the footsteps in the passageway would be too monotonous. Hundreds of researchers were in the underground laboratory. The base was very spacious, and the footsteps and voices could be heard far away, echoing vaguely. Outside the French window were the black fields, streets, buildings, space gates, and corpses. The black dust was actually the dust or the powder, and some places were the black ointment, though it was unclear if they were the rotten leaves. Jing Jiao halted his steps and looked at the window, recalling the art installation under the ice cap at the south pole of the main planet. A bird was struggling in vain on the surface of the ocean, full of black ointment. The officer thought Jing Jiao was interested in the French window, saying the high composite material has a good resistance to impact, so it's safe. Huashi exclaimed with widened eyes, "Now that all the monsters are dead, who will attack?" The officer was taken aback at first, and then explained to Jing Jiao, "The smooth metal and glass can both prevent the contamination, but we have to consider the strength of the materials." Jing Jiao didn't ponder the hidden meaning in what Huashi said, nor did he care about the officer's explanation. All he did was look at the window in silence. The city was right outside the window, soundless. The wind blew over the forest, and the fallen leaves were all black. It was deathly quiet. Chapter 854. Jing Jiao understood why General Li asked him to come here. Seeing the scenes with his own eyes and seeing them in the materials were two entirely different feelings. The former was more vivid and more realistic. Jing Jiao kept walking forward. The footsteps and the explanation broke out in the quiet and empty passageway again. One of the two military officers was familiar with the base and the environment of the outside world. The other was a researcher who knew more about the sea of dark matter. Up until now, the Research Institute has only been able to observe and calculate indirectly. The black dusts and powders are still the matter of our world, but they have been modified by a certain force on the level of the microscopic particles. The physical rules are chaotic in the superparticle state, so we can only conclude some rules. The existence of the dark matter is calculated based on mathematical tools, which can't be captured or collected. What we can ascertain is that it doesn't have a static mass. The infection is neither an invasion of a nervous system nor a modification. it's hard to understand. The distant ancient civilization has determined that the infection is irreversible, so they have no choice but to isolate it. To prevent the invasion of the sea of dark matter, the key is to cut off the source, that is, to wipe out those cracks in the secondary dimension. The supercomputer core of the Federation can monitor a part of the galaxy in real time. It's basically a race against time in these regions. Yet those cracks in the space occur soundlessly, and they can sometimes infect some planets. The proportion of colonized planets and mineral stars in this galaxy is very low. According to the frequency of the infection, the sea of dark matter has a much larger area than we had imagined in the past, and it might even surround this galaxy. The two military officers stopped in front of a floor-to-ceiling window and said, "It's the center of the city outside." Jing, Jiao, and Hua, she looked out of the window, but they didn't see any high-rise buildings, save for the black woods and shrubs. Some streets could be vaguely seen on the other side of the black woods. There were many cracks on the streets, from which black smoke was vaguely coming up. A gust of wind blew over and dispersed the black smoke, but it didn't vanish into the air. Instead, it dispersed in all directions. Countless particles fell down from the black treetops, and the wild grasses on both sides of the streets were drifting slowly, as if they would come back to life, but they were still lifeless. The particles in the smoke were the spores they had seen after the spaceship entered the atmosphere. The professors of the Research Institute were certain that the black spores were the cells that had been infected by the dark matter. All the infected creatures on this planet were dead, at least on the surface. The spores had no vitality and could not continue to infect other things, but they still looked very scary. It was true that the sea of dark matter had infected the living beings, or more precisely, the organic beings. If there were no life forms on a planet, the sea of dark matter wouldn't bring about any change, even if it swallowed the planet. Moreover, the expansion of the sea of dark matter would slow down when there were no living beings, and it was far slower than the speed at which the galaxies moved away from each other. In other words, the sea of dark matter could at most affect the space of the local galaxy, but it couldn't pose any threat to the vast universe. Just like how a nail could not destroy the empire on the other side of the plains. The problem was that humans were not the universe itself, but life itself. Wherever the sea of dark matter passed, the sea of stars would turn into an abyss, and the lives would come to an end, and the human world would become a hell. The number of the extraterrestrial demons that had invaded the Stargate base was not large, but they had caused such a great loss because of these reasons. The city outside the window was the first hell. On the other side of the black smoke, the city was isolated by an invisible barrier, maintaining the appearance of hundreds of thousands of years ago. The distant ancient civilization was much more developed than the current Federation of the Milky Way, but their ideas were similar. It was evident that the rulers at the time intended to keep this hell as a laboratory to study the countermeasures and find a way to destroy the sea of dark matter. There were many corpses on the streets, in the buildings, and in the passageways. The corpses were the locust trees, the roses, the cockroaches, the rats, the dogs, the cats, and the humans. It was hard to imagine that the distant ancient civilization was so advanced that they could preserve this ugly world so well. The energy of the protective barrier can last for tens of thousands of years. The Federation has improved many aspects through the study of this protective barrier. The protective barrier of the new battleships and many protective barriers on the planetary level are all derived from this barrier. Of course, we can't achieve such a level of protection yet. An officer brought up the light screen and said to Jingjiao, while clicking on a tiny black speck on the screen, "The infected beings will lose all their senses, but they will retain their intelligence before death." According to the information we have collected about the distant ancient civilization and the suggestions of the scientists of the present age, we have classified these living beings into 5 categories. The tiny black speck enlarged rapidly on the light screen and turned into a small piece of grayish-black tree branch. It was unclear what kind of living being it was. This is an insect called the stickworm. After being infected, It will have an almost endless life, just like other living beings. However, it is not a threat to us. It's just that the spores emitted by it can continue to infect other living beings for half a minute after it is killed. The officer thought that Jingjiu didn't know about this, so he explained patiently and in detail, "We can kill these things by destroying their form completely, but we should try not to use this method on the battlefield." Jingjiu didn't give a response. The officer continued, "The infected insects are called the scale monster. The infected animals are called the half-tail. The plants are called the gray wood, and the microorganisms are more troublesome. They have a strange name called the bloody thumb. As for the infected humans, they are called the preface." The black specks on the light screen were enlarged one by one, revealing their shapes. They were the rumored monsters of the sea of dark matter. Even though they were given some ancient names by the distant ancient civilization and the scientists, they were still monsters. Though they were the tall and straight trees in the snow, the flowers swaying in the wind, the insects singing in the summer night, the cats on people's laps, the dogs under their feet, and the humans before they were infected, they were still monsters. According to the various monsters that appeared one by one, the detailed three-dimensional anatomical diagrams and detailed written explanations appeared on the light screen. They were the research results accumulated by the two civilizations, and they were very detailed. The diagrams included the movement speed of the monsters, their attacking methods, their weaknesses, and the fastest, simplest, most effective, and most economical way to destroy them. Some of the monsters were like a speck of dust, some looked like wild animals, and some looked like the zombies in the movies and games. Jingjiu was somewhat familiar with the appearance of these monsters, which was similar to the heavenly demons he had encountered after his ascension. The demons in the snowland of Chaotian were obviously the replicas of these monsters, or in other words, replicas of them, but one of them was black, and the other was white. Yet that god was not omnipotent. The demons of the Snowy Kingdom were obviously not as formidable as these monsters, and most importantly, they didn't have the ability to infect other living beings. The low temperature and the absolute deathly stillness were nonetheless different. Looking at the city outside the window, Jingjiu's eyes grew brighter and sharper. Though he saw many corpses of the blood thumbs, he still couldn't see the sea of dark matter. It was then that he thought of the mosquitoes in the fiend prison and cold cicada, and the snow girl for the umpteenth time. The circular base occupied a large area, so large that there was a mountain in the middle. In comparison to the peculiar high mountains on the equator of this planet, this mountain was not so high, but it was the highest mountain near the North Pole, so high that the city could be seen in its entirety. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingjiu looked at the city in the distance, remaining silent. The sunlight shone on his face, which was not as attractive as usual. It was probably because the emotion in his eyes and brows was a bit faint. As the zither music rang out, Shen Yunmai arrived by stepping on the air and landed by Jingjiu's side. "What kind of weapons did the distant ancient civilization use at the time?" asked Jingjiu. "That kind of weapon could kill all the monsters and life forms on the surface of the planet in a short time, and it could also seal the cracks in the space of 2 dimensions. It was, of course, remarkable. The current Federation of the Milky Way couldn't achieve such a feat, be it the neutron bomb or the super-concentrated electromagnetic bomb. It said that it was a weapon of the permanent star state, but the materials found by the Science Academy have no clue about it." Looking at the city in the dim light, Shen Yunmai continued, "Unfortunately, no matter how advanced a civilization is, it will enter the grave sooner or later." "Let's go and have a look," said Jingjiu. Jingjiu flew up from the cliff's edge and turned into a sword light, passing through the protective shield of the circular base and heading toward the distant city. The alarm rang out in the circular base, followed by countless surprise screams. Nobody could ensure his safety. What if he was infected by the dark energy? Chapter 855. Thanks to the unimaginable technology of the distant ancient civilization, this planet had no dark matter left, and it was impossible for those spores to remain active after so many years. The problem was that there might be some sleeping monsters in some extreme environments deep under the planet, and the most troublesome ones were the dark bacteria and viruses called blood thumbs, which might still exist in some places. Those blood thumbs were so tiny that they could hardly be seen by naked eyes. Even the swordsmen in the star state of the Federation of the Milky Way could not resist their infection without advanced protective equipment. After the incident in the building of the military headquarters, everybody knew that Jingjio was a formidable swordsman. However, he was the chief advisor of the military and had the highest authority, so he had to receive the strictest protection. Jingjio flew toward the nearby city without wearing any protective equipment, startling the military officers in the circular base. It didn't take long for the alarm to ring. A few armed mechas equipped with special suits rose into the sky, ready to chase after him along with the airwaves and flying dust. Seeing this, Shen Yunmai raised his eyebrows slightly, indicating that they should not worry. As the zither music started again, Jingju leaped into the sky and turned into a gust of wind, passing through the protective cover and disappearing into the distant city. There were neither tall buildings nor neon lights in the city. There were only dim streets and black corpses everywhere in the buildings that looked like floating islands. Those black corpses still had the same shape as they had many years ago, looking a bit soul-stirring. Reflecting the dim light of the distant stars, they looked like the real scenes in hell. Jingjio didn't pay attention to these corpses or the remains of the distant ancient civilization in the buildings. He raised his head and looked at the sky. A dozen sword lights passed through the dim streets and came to his side. The lights condensed into a figure. Shen Yunmai said, "The people in the Research Institute don't know that there are many blood thumbs on this planet, but the military officers in the base do." Jingjio uttered. After he arrived in the city, he had sensed the existence of those tiny, dark, and cold creatures, knowing that they should be the so-called blood thumbs. Those creatures were indeed too small to be seen or discovered, but they couldn't escape the perception of his sword awareness. The first time I came to 857, I was as confident as you are now, but I was infected. My right hand started to turn black, so I had to cut it off with a sword and get a mechanical arm. After that, I had to deal with these things more and more, and I felt that it was a little troublesome, so I changed my entire body. That's why I don't have to worry about these things now. Shen Yunmai raised her beautiful hands and admired them for a moment in the dim light of the star. "What about you?" she asked. "Why aren't you worried?" Jingjio recalled the battle in the military building and thought, "So that's how it is." Shen Yun looked at Jingjio's face. After looking at it for a while, he sighed and said, "That's right. Your body must also be special. There was no dark matter on this planet, and the spores were not active. Even if there were, Jingjio was not worried about being infected by the darkness. Earlier, a blood thumb had drifted over in the dust. He deliberately let it fall on his hand and felt it for a while before he shattered it with his sword will. With the blood thumb's piercing and soaking abilities, it could not break through his skin at all. The ascendants from Chao Tian, like the Immortal Tan and Chao Yuan, had no need to worry about these problems after their bodies were modified by the fairy energy. If that god intended to turn Chao Tian into a laboratory, he had at least succeeded in this aspect. What was hard to understand was that Shen Yunmai was the son of the Grandmaster of Aoyama, and his status in the Federation of the Milky Way was similar to that of the Crown Prince. As such, he knew many things. For instance, the Immortal Chi Song brought the battleship to pick Jingjio up, but he didn't know that the laboratory on the Stargate base had observed and studied his body. Shen Yunmai followed Jingjio's line of sight and asked, "What are you looking at?" Thinking of what Lien Sanue said, Jingjio replied, "I'm looking at the sun. Looking at the permanent star from the battleship, the color of the permanent star was almost black. Looking at it from the surface of the planet, the permanent star looked a bit brighter, looking more like a gray color. The gray color was the combination of the light and the darkness. The light was the permanent star itself, and the darkness was the spores covering the surface of the permanent star. As the temperature on the surface of the permanent star was not high enough, those dark spores were not burned away. They had stayed on the surface for more than 100,000 years after losing their vitality. Those dark spores drifted away from the planet and the battleship after losing their vitality, and were brought to the surface of the permanent star by the gravitational force. How many people had died in this galaxy more than 100,000 years ago? Hundreds of millions or billions. Most of the light and heat radiation of the permanent star had been blocked. But why could this planet survive until now? The temperature on the surface of the planet was still suitable, and the ruins were still intact. To say nothing of the fact that it hadn't become a world of ice and snow, and the lake water that was devoid of life energy hadn't frozen over. The utilization of the geothermal energy was only one aspect. The large energy furnace left by the distant ancient civilization was the most important reason. The Research Institute of the Science Academy of the Federation on this planet was far superior to the laboratories on the Stargate base in terms of level and scale. What the scientists and engineers needed to do was to understand, analyze, learn, and imitate the achievements left by the distant ancient civilization, and then transform them into the technological achievements of the new humans, such as the protective shield of the battleship and the mysterious weapons of the military. The technological prowess of the Federation of the Milky Way had advanced by leaps and bounds. It took them only a few thousand years to develop to such a level. It was because they had discovered this planet. The number of this planet was 857. It was the 857th planet with the remains of the distant ancient civilization that the new humans had discovered. Planet number 857 was the first planet to be swallowed by the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago. A great many spatial cracks appeared in the city and the underground, and the dark matter gushed out noiselessly, changing the whole world. The flowers, trees, birds, animals, and humans had all turned into dreadful monsters. The humans suffered a great deal of casualties, and the reinforcement fleet was also infected. The whole planet, and even the nearby space, had become a dreadful hell. In the end, the distant ancient civilization had no choice but to make a difficult decision. They employed a certain weapon to wipe out all the lives on the planet number 857. When the distant ancient civilization sealed off this planet and employed the secret weapon, many humans should still be alive on the surface and underground of the planet. Those humans had all died like the insects. In the next moment, this planet was completely sealed off. The Federation of the Milky Way had discovered many planets inhabited by the distant ancient civilization over the years, but the planet number 857 was the only one that was preserved so well, especially in the central area of this city. The humans still had some hope at the time. They wanted to find a way to defeat the sea of dark matter through research. Later, the humans didn't have any more hope. They abandoned all the planets swallowed by the sea of dark matter, and they didn't use so many resources to save them. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at the city. The whole city was enshrouded by a protective shield, and the air was absolutely still. There wouldn't be any wind for many years. However, a gust of breeze arose today as Jingjiu and Shinyamai arrived. The breeze blew up the black spores in the streets and buildings, making them flutter in the air. It was hard to describe the architectural style of the city with words. It was unclear whether it was the ancient style or the interplanetary style. It looked more like the exhibits in the modern art museums. In fact, this planet and this city were the exhibits left by the distant ancient civilization to the later generations, including those black corpses. As the breeze blew over, a tree toppled to the ground and turned into a puff of black smoke, turning into countless dead spores drifting in all directions. Jingjiu suddenly remarked as he followed the spores in the distance, "Some species are missing." The monsters transformed from the insects were the scales, the infected animals were the half-tails, the plants were the gray wood, the microorganisms were the bloody thumbs, and the humans were the precursors. Similar things could be seen in the snowland of Chaotian, like the snow beetles, the snow worms, and the personal guards of the snow girl. What was a snow girl then? He had encountered many heavenly demons of the outside world after his ascension. And what were those monsters waving the black tentacles? More importantly, What were the formidable and dreadful monsters called the Mother Nest by the Federation of the Milky Way? Were there other life forms in the universe? Those life forms were very powerful and would turn into the Mother Nest after being infected by the sea of dark matter. Jing Jiao was quite interested in this matter, which was a rare occurrence for him. Xin Yunmai knew what was on Jing Jiao's mind. It was because he had the same thought when he had just learned about this knowledge. It's a pity that the humans are still alone. It's certain that there are no intelligent life forms like us in the local galaxy. As for whether there are intelligent life forms in the alien galaxy, Xin Yunmai looked at the night sky and said, "That's the destination chosen by those escapees more than 100,000 years ago. But those guys must have died in the hopeless and long journey." This place was the edge of the local galaxy. The stars in the night sky visible from the number 857 planet were not so dense that it couldn't be called a sea of stars. It was pitch black when the planet's back was facing the local galaxy. After a moment of silence, Jing Jiao said, "We should go there and have a look." Chapter 856. More than 100,000 years ago, when the distant ancient civilization was facing a catastrophe, they divided into a few groups, as described in many novels. The two most mainstream factions were naturally the defense faction and the escape faction. The history proved that the defense group had been completely annihilated in the end. Yet, they had succeeded in stopping the expansion of the sea of dark matter and keeping it dormant. This patch of the universe had welcomed a new human civilization more than 100,000 years later, so it couldn't be said that they were failures. There were many conjectures as to what would happen to the escape group. Most of the conjectures were that they would end up in a hopeless or even miserable state. This was not a curse with hatred, but the result of many calculations based on many mathematical models. Jing Jiao had made a few simple calculations and found that the escape group would end up in a bad situation. It was hard to reach the edge of the universe, and it was also hard to reach other galaxy groups, like the opposite shore in the legends. Even if they left the edge of this galaxy group and went to the nearest galaxy group, it would be a long journey that would lead to the extinction of the civilization. There were trillions of permanent stars in this galaxy group, spanning a distance of 10 million light years. But why could the distant ancient civilization and the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way reach most of the places in this galaxy group? The reason was simple. It was because the distant ancient civilization and the humans had the star map of this galaxy group. The star map referred to was not the information about the distribution of the star areas or the relative positions, but the invisible warped holes among the stars. The warp holes were like the wormholes in the mud. The entrances and exits were all in the field, and it was impossible to observe the inside of the holes. As long as they could figure out the information, they would be able to travel freely. All the warped holes discovered by the humans were in this galaxy group for some unknown reason or because of the evil intention of the Creator. Even the brave warriors who were brave enough to face the unknown dangers couldn't leave through the warped holes. The flying devices of the humans had to rely on the conventional propulsion to travel to the farther universe. Even though the devices of the gravitational field were more developed and the curvature flight had become a reality, the flying devices of the humans still couldn't surpass the speed of light. Since they couldn't surpass the speed of light, the distance between the galaxies became an unimaginable concept of time. No matter how many crystals and energy supplies those flying devices carried, they were far from enough compared to the vastness of the universe. In the end, they would die because they ran out of energy, just like the fate of this universe. The mountains could be opened, the seas could be leveled, and the lovers could meet, but it was impossible. Nirvana was only related to entropy and had nothing to do with hard work. Some people also proposed a common hypothesis in science fiction. The fugitive humans who took the giant spaceship to leave might establish a completely different social model in the long space voyage, creating different morals and laws, stimulating more life potential, evolving into a more powerful new human being, and there was hope that they could reach the other side. This kind of hypothesis once prevailed for decades, until the Hua family published an extremely short article according to that female priest's intention. The last paragraph of the article read as follows. Even after hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, from the grassland to the starry sky, humans have not undergone any fundamental changes. Even if they have changed, so what? The Protoss cannot transcend the laws of physics of this universe. The evolution of all life itself occurs under the existing laws of physics. Those who left back then are already dead, and any expectations for them are a humiliation to the dead and irresponsible to themselves. Jing Jiao had learned a lot about the fugitives of the ancient civilization from the top-secret documents, and he had also read the article written by the girl in the bathrobe. However, he still believed that humans should go to more distant places. His expression was calm, and his tone was nonchalant when he made the statement, as if he were saying that it was time to get up in the morning. Looking at him, Shun Yunmai furrowed his eyebrows slightly, as if he couldn't understand why someone like Jing Jiao would say such meaningless words like those excellent miners. Jing Jiao didn't have a way to travel through the galaxy, so he dropped the topic. There is no other intelligent life in this galaxy. What are the heavenly demons of the outside world? He asked. Shun Yunmai had heard the cocoon breakers talking about Chao Tian, and he had read Jing Jiao's article carefully, so he knew what the heavenly demons of the outside world meant. The monsters created by the dark matter and the second infection of the spores. You can consider them as new monsters created by swallowing and merging with each other. According to the current analysis, the blood thumb played an important role in this process, and some rare monsters might have something to do with the spiritual wills of the cultivation practitioners. You have to be careful if you encounter them. Thinking of the heavenly demons of the outside world he had encountered after leaving Chao Tian, Jing Jiao thought that the ones killed by the Snow Girl were not so powerful, but the one he encountered in the end was indeed troublesome. He had used up all of his fairy energy to kill the mother nest. If the frequency of the mother nest was too high, Jing Jiao would have no choice but to find a way to build a spaceship with a superluminal speed. Shun Yunmai continued. We call the monster of the highest state merged with the mother nest. It can release many spore generators, and its body is extremely powerful. Even the swordsmen in the inherited night state, or the figures in the heavenly arrival state, as you call them, are not a match for it. Though you're very powerful, you shouldn't fight it alone. Let the fleet do it. How could he not know that Jing Jiao had killed a mother nest? Thinking that Jing Jiao didn't know what he had experienced in the lab of the Stargate, Jing Jiao felt it odd. He thought that those old guys took care of this child as if he were a baby and only told him what he needed to know. They didn't tell him anything about the secrets that could bring him danger. Thinking of all this, Jing Jiao fixed his gaze on a pile of black fallen leaves by the street. The gust of wind brought by Jing Jiao and Shun Yunmai had stirred up many dead spores and turned many fallen leaves into powder. The pile of black fallen leaves became sparser, exposing the thing underneath. It was hard to tell if the human corpse was a man or a woman. The thing in his arms was not a baby, but a cat. Both the human and the cat retained their original shapes, covered with a thin layer of black. If one looked closely, they would find that the black layer was made up of countless tiny black crystals. What kind of weapons were used by the distant ancient civilization more than 100,000 years ago? Jing Jiao walked over, squatted down, and stroked the dead cat gently. He didn't sense any remaining energy, but somehow he felt a familiar and intimate feeling coming from his fingertip. Jing Jiao had an unimaginably strong control over his body. This should be the most tender touch in the universe, but the cat and the human holding it collapsed instantly, falling down and turning into ashes. This scene reminded Jing Jiao of the ancient battleground at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley, where the skeletons of the huge animals were blown into ashes by the wind. The code of the circular base was the same as that of this planet, 857. The living facilities in the base were quite complete, even a bit luxurious. The suite provided for him, the chief consultant of the military, could be compared with the luxurious villas on the vacation planets. Sitting by the window, Huashi looked at the vast sandy land on the other side of the base, lost in thought. The young military officer stood in a corner in silence, the corners of his mouth curling up slowly, as if he had just said something. According to the law of the Federation of the Milky Way, a cyborg like him had no basic human rights because he didn't have artificial intelligence. According to the law of the Federation of the Milky Way, any development in the field of artificial intelligence was forbidden. As such, the former law was basically a few paragraphs of nonsense. This young military officer had no sense of existence, be it on the scorching sun battleship or here. It was probably for this reason that Jing Jiao and Hua Shi didn't hide anything from him. Hearing the footsteps, Hua Shi turned around and asked Jing Jiao, "What did you see?" Jing Jiao countered, "Why do you think General Li asked me to see all this?" After some thought, Hua Shi replied, "I think he hoped that you could see the problem and then help solve it." "What do you think then?" asked Jing Jiao while staring into her eyes. The information in this planet had told him many things, and the conversation with Shen Yunmai had helped him ascertain some facts. The ascendants in Chaotian included the human cultivation practitioners, the divine animals of ancient times, the giants in the ocean, and the snow girl. Where were these powerful beings? Shen Yunmai knew very little. The grandmasters of Aoyama and General Li had indeed placed the hope of solving the problem of the sea of dark matter on Jingjiao. Jingjiao didn't know if this was a good thing or not. In other words, there was nothing good or bad about this matter. Hearing Jingjiao's question, Hua Shi looked at the barren plain outside the window again. There was no smile on her small face, and the expression in her eyes was no longer naive. It was so peaceful that it was frightening. If you were the leader of the humans, what would you choose when you encountered the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago? The introduction on the cover has been changed a few days ago. Maybe many of you don't know it. You can check it out. The introduction is a statement by Mr. Lu Sun. If a human wants to become a ferryman, he should ascend to heaven even though he was born on the ground. It is like the title of this chapter. Chapter 857. It was the happiest period of the human race since the birth of the ancestral planet. Their lifespan, health, cultivation and martial arts, gene modification, technological level, social structure, governance, energy sources, and even entertainment were almost perfect. However, it was then that they encountered the sea of dark matter. Standing by the window, Hua, she said softly, if it were the tragic period of war and chaos, or the period when the civilization suffered the first catastrophe and left the ancestral planet, we wouldn't feel sad if we encountered the sea of dark matter or the hell was destroyed. But why did we encounter the greatest catastrophe during the best period? If there is no reason in the universe, is this our fate? Why are we so unlucky then? Jing Jiao said, Zhao Liu once said that there are many pleasant sounds in the world. The stream water is pleasant to the ears, so we should listen to it. Why should we applaud? Hua Shi turned around and looked at him expressionlessly, as if she didn't understand why he made such an irrelevant remark. The stream water flows by itself and makes a sound when it meets the rocks. Whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, it has nothing to do with us. Neither the stream water nor the rocks intend to let you hear it. Jing Jiao continued, by the same logic, the appearance of the sea of dark matter has nothing to do with us when it meets the life forms and causes death. The dark forces and the life forms affected by it have no emotions, love, or hatred, and they don't even have subjective purpose. They happen to appear in this galaxy. This is still fate, said Hua Shi. Jing Jiao said, you can say that this is fate, but it's actually a matter of probability. And I've always thought that the humans or the life forms are fortunate to have appeared. It's because death and non-existence are the norm. As such, it's not that the humans are ill-fated even if they are extinct. It's just that they have returned to their normal state. After a moment of silence, Hua Shi said, it's said in a book that there is no such thing as fate but choice. What is your choice then? If it were someone else, their first reaction would be, I'm not the leader of the humans. Why should I shoulder such a heavy responsibility? It would drive me crazy to decide the fate of the humans by my own choice, but Jing didn't think so. He was fully aware that he was qualified and capable of shouldering this responsibility. The only issue was whether he was willing to do so. General Lee had asked him to come to this planet and see this city. Huashi's question was, in fact, a form of expectation or observation. Inspecting people was something he disliked the most. However, he still decided to answer this question because Huashi's attitude was very important to his plan. Jing said, "Like that, God, I'll try to solve the problem of the sea of dark matter first." This meant that they were going to fight. Huashi looked into his eyes for a long time and suddenly asked, "After you stay, what will you do with this planet?" Of course, he was asking about something that happened more than 100,000 years ago. Jing had already gotten the answer in that city. He said, "If the final result of the mathematical model is like this, I will do the same thing." Huashi turned and looked out the window. The wasteland outside the window was still so desolate. Her figure seemed a little lonely, but for some reason, he could feel that her aura had softened. "Aren't you afraid of death the most?" she continued to ask. Jing said, "So we have to solve the problem. Didn't you say that silence and non-existence are the norm? The goal of cultivation is to get out of the norm. If the problem of the sea of dark matter can't be solved, will you try to leave?" "Of course." "One last question. If you have to sacrifice yourself in exchange for the survival of more people, will you be willing to do it?" "I won't." "Why?" "As long as I'm alive, the humans will be alive." Hearing Jing answer, Huashi fell silent for a long time. The black permanent star had no light, and the sunlight on the circular base was artificial. As a result, the wasteland outside the window looked like the scenery in an oil painting, unreal. She said in a nostalgic and regretful tone, "If only he had been as bad as you are back then." Jing knew whom she referred to. He said sentimentally, "The paths are different, but they are all the same." "Speaking of the paths, I think of you. Is the life of the cultivation practitioners really so boring? Don't you listen to music or dance?" Huashi resumed the appearance of an innocent and adorable little girl, as if an aged soul had left her body in an instant. The scene was truly eerie. Yet, Jing didn't show any reaction, saying, "Yes, but I don't like it." Huashi widened her eyes and asked while looking at him curiously, "What do you like then?" "I just asked them. They have everything here." The 857 Circular Base was the most important secret base in the Federation of the Milky Way. It was heavily guarded and kept a secret. It was hard for the military officers and the researchers to leave this place after they came here. As such, the living facilities here were quite complete. As she said, this place had everything. Here, one could watch the latest movies, listen to the latest music, and play the latest games from the 3 gaming companies. Of course, the gaming cabins were of the best quality, and there were all kinds of cultivation equipment. If one had enough privileges, or she could even enjoy some special things. "I don't like anything," said Jing Huashi looked at him sympathetically, as if she were looking at a good student who was forced by his parents to study every day and didn't have time for entertainment. When Jing was still the immortal Jing Yang, he lived a simple life, and he didn't like dealing with others. In addition, Nan Wang liked drinking alcohol and singing songs after drinking alcohol. As such, Jing was used to staying behind closed doors in the manor cave. Yet he still had some things he liked to do at that time, such as hot pot and mahjong. After he became Jing he lost all his 5 senses. He could only collect information and simulate it by calculating. He had no interest in such things as eating, drinking, and having fun. He didn't even like playing mahjong because he couldn't feel it. It was like the difference between playing mahjong in reality and playing mahjong in games. From a certain perspective, he was indeed worthy of sympathy. When Zhao Liu, Lu Shui, and Gu Qin discovered this, they all wanted to hug him and lift him up because they felt sorry for him. Jing didn't think it was something worth feeling sorry for. He didn't mind paying such a small price for his survival, and he didn't like the feeling of being pitted. He didn't pay any more attention to Huashi. He connected to the special network of the circular base and continued reading the materials related to the sea of dark matter. Huashi didn't want to pay any more attention to him. She turned around and led the young officer to the outside of the room, asking, "Is the wine party fun tonight? How about the alcohol? I like the strong alcohol." The young officer said, "According to the laws of the Federation, you are not old enough to drink alcohol." Huashi pouted and said, "I'll go dance then." The young officer said, "According to the analysis of the data, the favorite music of the host of the base is psychedelic rock, which is not suitable for your favorite dance." Huashi halted her steps and said, "Let's find a host who likes the swing dance." Jingjio lifted his head and shot her a glance. As the data flowed like a waterfall, it was already late at night. The wine party on the 857 base had reached its climax. Even though he was a long distance away from the heavy alloy door, Jingjio could hear the increasingly louder cheers. It seemed that Huashi's wish had been fulfilled. The songs of the wine party were indeed swaying. As Jingjio was about to shut off his six senses and shield himself from the sounds of the outside world, he suddenly heard a faint sound of something breaking through the air in the night sky. The alarm on the base didn't sound. The sound of something breaking through the air was quite sharp at first and then abruptly disappeared. It meant that the other party moved at a very high speed, even faster than the combat armors. Jingjio figured out that the person was Shun Yunmai. After some thought, he pushed open the window and flew out. The sun in this galaxy was very dim. It was nighttime, so the environment was even darker. It was quite conspicuous in this galaxy and other galaxies. Under the starry sky, the two sword lights left the circular base. It didn't take long for them to arrive in the barren land in the south. There was no barrier to isolate the cities here. The barren land was truly desolate, devoid of life energy, and covered with black dusts everywhere. Jingjio landed on a high peak, looking at the black field. The dusts were rolling in the field like a huge dragon. Shin Yunmai was running. He didn't fly. Instead, he kept running on the ground of the field, occasionally letting out a few shouts. There was no purpose or reason for him to run at night. This black field was the hell of death. Running in the hell and smelling the smell of death was what he wanted to do. However, it was something that others didn't dare to do. As such, his actions seemed crazy and incomprehensible to others. Nobody knew how many dangers were hidden in the black field without a protective shield. They didn't know whether there were blood thumbs or spores with residual vitality, or even some monsters. Standing by the cliff's edge, Jingjio watched the scene with appreciation. It didn't take long before Shin Yunmai ran back from the black field. The few battleships outside the atmosphere all noticed a straight line on the surface of the Earth, which was about 700 miles long. Along with the sound of rolling crushed stones, Shun Yunmai climbed to the peak top. Looking at the starry sky, he took a deep breath of the thin air that smelled of the spores of death and asked, "What are you doing here?" He combed his hair into a simple Taoist bun and wore a white robe, as usual. After running at night, his hair was scattered on his shoulders, and his white robe was full of holes, some of which were even a bit scorched. It could be said that he was in rags. Jingjio glanced at him and remarked, "Your robe is not good enough." Chapter 858. There was indeed something wrong with Shun Yunmai's mind. His intelligence was too high. He had been far away from ordinary people's emotions since he was a child. The world thought he was ruthless, cruel, and unreasonable, but it was because he had seen through the emotions and principles. His emotions were not similar to those of ordinary people, but he was also competitive. He sneered and said, "What do you know? When I was 14 years old, I made myself a set of white clothes out of ultrafine particles. Not to mention the wind and dust like tonight. Even cosmic rays and ordinary flames wouldn't leave a single mark on it. The problem was, what was the point of that? It's not natural at all, and it's boring." "Cotton and linen?" asked Jingjio. Shin Yunmai said, "I'm more interested in the natural silk you mentioned." Jingjio thought Bai Zhao would not ascend, so he could not find the natural silk even if he wanted it. So he suggested, "It's the most comfortable to wear no clothes." There was no material that was softer than the wind, and no clothes that were more comfortable than a vacuum. Shin Yunmai understood this, So he explained, I haven't decided what sex characteristics to choose. It's a bit weird to wear no clothes. His body had been modified. Everything from his muscles, bones, internal organs, hair, and teeth was the product of the combination of the latest materials, the most advanced technology, and the most brilliant Taoist magic. His genitals were also modified, but he had been hesitating whether he should continue to be a man or a woman. It was a shocking thing, both in terms of his idea and the actual operation. If it were someone else, they would not know how to respond. However, Jingjiu was quite calm, as if he was talking about what they should eat for dinner. He continued to suggest, do it in a way that's convenient for you. Xin Yunmai said seriously, everyone has their own inconvenience. Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, they all had their own advantages, inconveniences, and burdens. Jingjiu thought it was reasonable, so he said, the angels in the ancient religions don't have gender, so they're not ugly. Xin Yunmai shook his head and said, they look too abnormal and inhuman. You are a freak to begin with, said Jingjiu. Upon hearing this, Xin Yunmai did not get angry. Instead, he felt quite comfortable, even more comfortable than running naked in the spring breeze. It was not because he was a masochist, nor was it because he had never heard others call him a pervert in his life. It was because when Jingjiu said that he was a pervert, his tone was very calm and his expression was very natural. It was obviously a statement without any emotion. Who could discuss that shocking question with him in such a calm manner? Which pervert could talk about perverted things with him? He looked at Jingjiu and seriously said, you'll be the first to inform me when I decide. By the way, do you want to keep a fur? Jingjiu said, what's the point of keeping useless things? Xin Yunmai glanced at his black hair. Beautiful, said Jingjiu. By the time Jingjiu returned to the ring base, the banquet had also ended. Huaxi's small face was a bit red, but she didn't sweat. She looked as refreshing as before, but she had a faint smell of alcohol on her body. Seeing the expressionless Jingjiu, she remembered that she had a job to do. She stuck out her tongue and took out the iron kettle, starting to boil tea. The night passed uneventfully. In the early morning the next day, Jingjiu picked up the teacup and took a sip of the cold tea, heading toward the outside of the room. He had only taken a few steps when he thought of Jing Li's wife and realized that he might be getting old. The two military officers from the day before had been waiting for him outside the door. They led him to the underground by the elevator. It took the elevator a while to arrive at the Research Institute, which should be 7 kilometers underground. The distant ancient civilization had also modified this planet, but it was not as thorough as the Stargate base. It should not have been completely emptied. The style of the research institutes was similar. The smooth and cold alloy walls ensured the strength and cleanliness of the buildings, and the ventilation system and access control system ensured the security of the research institutes. However, the energy supply system here was different from that in other places in the Federation of the Milky Way. It was wireless transmission, which should be the standard of the energy transmission technology of the distant ancient civilization. The arrival of Jingjiu drew the attention of many staff members in the Research Institute. They all stood up and saluted him in the military or gazed at him, no matter whether they were the technical officials wearing the general stars or the eccentric professors. These technical officials and professors were all a bit old. Jingjiu recalled the introduction he had heard the day before. The Research Institute of the 857 planet base was designed to minimize the number of personnel changes as much as possible due to the need for absolute secrecy. Most of the participants had signed the lifelong service agreement in advance and had never gone out since they arrived on the planet. The occasional vacations on other planets were under the close supervision of the military. The genetically modified humans could live to more than 200 years old. A few old professors in the Research Institute had even lived on this planet for more than 100 years. The precious relics of the ancient civilization had a great attraction for these professors and scholars. Their long years of research life were not boring, but it was inevitable that there would be some side effects, especially when most of the male researchers were mentally ill. They had severe hair loss, and their aesthetic and living abilities had declined. There were only 30 checkered shirts in their wardrobes. Jingjiu had no objection to the last point. Dozens of identical white shirts were placed in the manor cave on the Shinma Peak. What he thought was that these researchers had a high proportion of bald heads, and they couldn't save much light, so it was unnecessary to do so. No matter how busy the researchers were, they all stood up and greeted the new chief advisor of the military, no matter how busy they were. Those scholars who were obsessed with research and had their minds wandering around were a bit conspicuous. Jingjiu noticed a professor. The professor wore a checkered shirt that had been washed so many times that the color had faded. His hair was as sparse as the willow trees by the lake of the 1,000-mile windy corridor, which was quite inconspicuous. He didn't drool while looking at the electronic image of the gravitational lens, nor did he applaud the latest achievement of the neutrino collector. Like most of the researchers, he nodded to him with a polite but boring smile, and then sat back in his chair as if he were reading a document. Nobody noticed the unusual behavior of this professor. Even Ran Handong couldn't discover it by using the big data collection method. It was because he didn't show any unusual behavior. Yet, Jingjiu found the problem with this professor. It was because of his intuition as a cultivation practitioner, and because his checkered shirt, sparse hair, and alienated eyes were too common. He was like a drop of water in the ocean among the people of the research institute. It was hard to tell him apart. Of course, the crux of the matter was that Jingjiu knew this person. The 857 Research Institute had recently signed a contract with a professor from the Institute of High Energy Physics, whose family name was Long. Even the most rigorous military investigation didn't find out that this Professor Long had taught at the Northwest University of China, and his family name was Go. According to the standard time in this world, he was still in Chaotian last year, and he was the secmaster of the Zhongzhou school at the time, the Immortal Tan. Jingjiu didn't talk to the Immortal Tan, nor did he ask the military officer about Professor Long. His gaze lingered on Professor Long's face for almost the same amount of time as he did on other professors, except that his gaze lingered on the shiny forehead for a short while longer. It would be considered intentional if he didn't look at Professor Long. The purpose of the meeting that day was to teach the new chief advisor of the military a lesson. 11 experts and scholars with the most experience and knowledge in the annular base and the whole of the military were appointed as the teachers. The information given by Shen Yunmai was a secret, not knowledge. The war between the humans and the sea of dark matter that had lasted more than 100,000 years contained a great deal of information and knowledge in many aspects. They had to teach all of it to Jingjiu as soon as possible. When he visited the annular base and the city the day before, the military officer had given him a preliminary introduction, such as the classification of the monsters of the sea of dark matter. Yet, in the class that day, the classification of the monsters of the sea of dark matter was broken down into more than 300 types, not including the subspecies that were not mentioned due to the lack of information. The humans had used many different weapons and tactics to destroy the monsters. The outline of the war had been shown on the light screen for half a minute. As for the history of the war and the related history of the recovery of the civilization and the details of the reappearance of the sea of dark matter, there was a great deal of information. In the eyes of these experts and scholars, it would take at least 60 days for this chief advisor of the military to master all of them, even though he had the same wisdom and knowledge as the young Master Shun, a good memory and a strong mental strength. The problem was which field of knowledge he should learn first. Jingjiu didn't like wasting his time on these matters. Hearing the arguments of the experts in various fields in the meeting room, he said, "Let's do it together." Chapter 859. The quarrels among the specialists in the meeting room had abruptly ceased, and everybody fixed their gazes on Jingjiu. They were puzzled and puzzled, wondering what he meant by this. Was he going to fight? 1 against 30? A few specialists were displeased to hear this, showing a mocking and disdainful expression in their eyes, but they didn't say anything. Jingjiu didn't care what these people were thinking. "Separate them," he said to the military officer. The military officer acted quickly. It didn't take long for the meeting room to be divided into 11 small compartments, one for each specialist. Sitting on a comfortable chair, Jingjiu looked at the display on the terminal that looked like a huge screen. The data of various fields and subjects flowed like running water on the screen and then entered his eyes. This method of learning was more efficient for him, just like what he had done in the Guoqing temple and later in the apartment. When he encountered a problem with the data or had a different opinion, he would ask the specialists in the relevant fields, and the specialist would answer him immediately. The questions he asked and the answers of the specialist were displayed on each other's screen through the data, so they didn't need the slow and low-end communication like the sound. The special feature of the spores lies in their different molecular structures. They can withstand high temperatures, but they can also withstand the cold like other subspecies. They can maintain their vitality even when the temperature is close to absolute zero, and they will die naturally as time elapses. As such, the range of infection of the first generation of spores in the universe is fixed. The furthest recorded is 92 astronomical units of the main planet. Of course, this doesn't take into account the distance when the spores attach to the battleships and pass through the warped voids. Yes, the most regrettable thing is that these dark monsters can pass through the warped voids. Nobody knows why. It's probably because the dimensional rifts have something to do with the warped voids. The physicists have a conjecture that the warped voids are their normal space in the world of dark matter. 3 degrees Celsius above absolute zero is the survival limit of these monsters. It might be a coincidence or a metaphysical phenomenon, but it's the same as the background radiation of the universe on the other side of the sea of dark matter. According to the result calculated by the Fu's transformation, the proliferation coefficient is between 2.6 and 3. 4. The miniaturization of the gravitational lens was completed 4 years ago, but the 3 fleets still can't discover the dark matter directly, let alone capture it. There's no problem with using Planet Qingqiu's scythe for indirect observation. According to the statistics of the cases, their spore production rate is the lowest, so it's the safest. The strength of the mother nest's defense lies in its materials. In the past 30 years, 4 new elements and even more special-shaped alloys have been discovered, but none of them are stronger than the mother nest materials. According to the data of the ancient civilization and the analysis of more than 300 cases, there is a certain probability of breaking through the mother nest defenses with super-powerful laser beams and neutrino weapons. There is no social structure, but there are social classes. There is no intelligence, but there are instincts. The distinction between intelligence and instincts does not exist in a philosophical sense. Okay. Let's not talk about philosophy. Dai Su's emotional fluctuations should be regarded as the direction of some kind of fluctuation. 94% of the fleet's nuclear bombs have been replaced with 7-phase bombs. The Academy of Sciences calls the process of dimensional rifts disintegrating melting because it requires a lot of light and heat. The picture is quite similar. The specific temperature requirement is about 7 million degrees. No life or dark life can withstand this kind of temperature. So even if the energy overflow is very wasteful, the military still insists on using nuclear bombs as the weapon of choice, laser and microwave weapons as the backup, and physical weapons are abandoned. There are 7 models in the initial stage of a fugitive fleet, and 6 of them will cause the fleet to be completely destroyed within 100 years. The achievements of mental imprinting and mind control involve some top-secret information. These people in the conference room should not have come into contact with it, including me. The ring kept emitting a faint light that was invisible to the naked eye. The data on the light screen kept flowing, and new questions and answers appear from time to time. Jingjiu read the information very quickly, and the questions became more and more profound. The expressions of the experts gradually changed. They were no longer in the mood to watch the show, and they became much more serious when reading the information and answering the questions. The conference room was very quiet. Only the faint static sound of the light screen and the sound of chairs moving could be heard. The constant movement of chairs indicated that some experts were getting nervous. They stared at the light screen in the cubicles, afraid that they might miss some important information and make a mistake in answering the questions. Seeing the scene, the officers in charge of the affairs felt it quite amazing, thinking that it was more like the consultants were testing the knowledge of these experts instead of teaching them a lesson. It should be noted that these experts were the top scholars in the annular base and even in the entire Federation of the Milky Way. As the questions and answers continued, the experts entered the most serious state of research, which was the same as when they were in a laboratory. Some of them took off their bow ties rudely. Some of them wiped their glasses with the hem of their shirts. Some of them put their legs on the desks. And some of them scratched their hair. It was noon after more than 300 questions, but none of them felt hungry. They just felt a bit tired. Jingjiu sensed the mental state of the experts. Stroking the ring on his finger, he asked, "Do you have any more questions?" Normally, it should be the experts who asked him this question, but it was he who asked them. One of the experts replied uncertainly, "It seems that there are no more questions." "Do you have any more questions?" "I don't have any questions. It's just that the possibility mentioned by Mr. Consultant has given me some new ideas. I'd like to go back to the laboratory to do some calculations. I also have some new ideas. If Mr. Consultant wants to study by himself in the afternoon, can I ask for leave? I'm a bit confused at the moment. I'd like to go and have a drink. Who wants some? Let's go, let's go." The experts were talking at the same time in the conference room. Jingjiu got up and walked to the window, looking at the green grassland and the darker forest outside, as well as the pearl-like lakes in the distance. This was the deep underground of the annular base. The window was fake, and the scenery outside the window was also fake. Such a scene reminded him of the cell in the sword jail and the snow girl. "I have one last question." Looking at this beautiful world, Jingjiu thought of the miserable world on the ground and the humans who had died soundlessly in that city. What was the weapon used by the distant ancient civilization on this planet? An antimatter gun? The conference room suddenly became very quiet. After an unknown period of time, the voice of one of the experts rang out. The Research Institute has always regarded that weapon as a substellar weapon. However, according to the calculation of the residual energy waves, that weapon had a large amount of energy left when it was activated. It might even have used the lowest energy. This means that if the distant ancient civilization had wanted to, they could have directly destroyed this planet or even a celestial body of an even larger size. Another expert said regretfully, "We've studied the remnants of the war on this planet for many years, but unfortunately, we didn't get any results by reverse analysis. The antimatter gun is indeed one of the conjectures, but there's no evidence. In my opinion, it's not very likely. The main reason is that the missing information is too serious. I even suspect that someone had erased the information back then." He was talking about the governing authorities of the distant ancient civilization. Jingjiu was silent for a moment and said, "Thank you." That afternoon, Jingjiu didn't go to the conference room again. He spent most of his time by the window, looking at the black wasteland in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. However, the conference room was still preserved, and the dozen or so experts from various fields didn't leave either. As he looked at the black wasteland by the window, Jingjiu was thinking of many things. Innumerable numbers, symbols, formulas, and functions appeared in his awareness, and then they were rearranged and rearranged. The war between the humans and the sea of dark matter had lasted for more than 100,000 years, and it was even longer than the longest epic poem, with a great deal of information and related knowledge. Even Jingjiu needed some time to organize, analyze, and digest the information. During the process, he would encounter some new problems, and he would need the help of these experts. The days went on for a few days. Huashi didn't forget her work. She boiled an iron pot of hot tea for Jingjiu every morning and night. It was unclear where she went during the rest of the time. She would come back late at night with the smell of alcohol. Shin Yunmai had returned to the Central Star Fleet. It was unclear if he had some other mission, as he hadn't been seen in the last few days. One day, the study was over. In the eyes of the experts and professors, it would have taken them at least 60 days to complete the massive project, but it had taken them only 9 days. The experts were well aware that Jing Jiao had an extraordinary learning ability, so they accepted the fact easily. They dispersed with a sentimental mood and went back to their own studies. That night, Jing Jiao contacted Ran Handong through the ring and inquired about the whereabouts of the Central Star Fleet. Ran Handong knew that the Central Star Fleet was by the edge of the Sea of Dark Matter, but she didn't have any further information. She reported the recent situation of Zhonglizi and the situation in the Federation of the Milky Way before Jing Jiao could ask her. Everything was fine. As the door of a room was opened, she walked in with a tired expression and put the iron pot on the stove. The tea in the iron pot began to boil, exuding a greasy smell because the tea had been boiled for a long time. She bade Jing Jiao good night and lay on the bed to sleep. Jing Jiao waved his hand and used the sword fire to burn the alcohol molecules and the molecules related to the smell in the air into nothingness. He walked to the window and saw the sword light in the night sky. The transparent window quivered slightly, and his figure disappeared, turning into a sword light in the night sky. Huashi opened her eyes and looked at the spot in front of the window, her small face devoid of any emotion. It didn't take long for Jing Jiao to arrive at the high peak in the south of the planet. Sitting by the cliff's edge, Shen Yunmai held a pot of alcohol in his chest and a chicken leg in his hand, looking a bit awkward. It was because his empty left sleeve looked like a piece of white silk fluttering in the dark night. "Is it broken?" asked Jing Jiao after taking a look at it. Shen Yunmai uttered, Chapter 860. It was evident that Shen Yunmai had imitated Jing Jiao's own. Jing Jiao didn't say anything. He knew that Shen Yunmai would say that he had learned from Lu Ci if he told him. He was still annoyed that Lu Ci had blocked the heavenly punishment by the West Ocean, so he didn't want to hear this name. His line of sight fell on a flagon held by Shen Yunmai. The flagon was made of clay, so it was probably an antique. Most importantly, the molecules of the wine in the jug had a smell that he was familiar with. It was neither malt wine nor barley wine. It didn't have the peat, the sweetness of sugarcane, or the fragrance of star anise or cinnamon. It was a clean and strong white wine. You can smell it? It seems that the logistics department has copied it well. Looking at Jing Jiao's expression, Shen Yunmai seemed to have forgotten the fact that he was severely wounded. "I'll record it for them," he said complacently. Jing Jiao said, "There's a kind of small golden flower in the south, but it doesn't exist in this world. The taste is a bit different." This was the wine Nan Wang liked to drink. It was also the wine he had drunk the most. "We can't expect the world to be as perfect as we are." Shen Yunmai removed the clay seal and took a sip. After savoring the aftertaste for a while, he continued, "After reading your work, I wanted to imitate it. So I gathered a technical team to tackle the problem and bothered Li Chunyang a few times." The members of the group were probably the highly skilled craftsmen in the wineries in the Federation of the Milky Way or the master wine-tasting masters on the vacation planets. In a sense, what Jing Jiao had been learning these last few days was the same way. Jing Jiao remembered that the great Grandmaster Dao Yuan had told him that the immortal Chunyang liked drinking wine very much. It seemed that this kind of wine had already appeared in the south at that time. Shen Yunmai handed the flagon to Jing Jiao. "No, thanks," said Jing Jiao. Shen Yunmai didn't mind it. He took another 2 sips and said while shooting a glance at Jing Jiao, "Don't you want to ask me why I lost an arm?" Jing Jiao thought that it was just a broken arm. There was no need to ask about it. He was good at cutting off limbs, so he had seen many people with broken arms over the last 1,000 years, such as Jian Shilai. "Fine. Losing an arm is indeed not a big deal. I have 12 spare parts in the fleet. I could just install a new one and do some technical upgrades." Shen Yunmai picked up the drumstick and tore off a piece. After chewing it a few times, he swallowed it and said, "But it's a little expensive. It'll be troublesome during the budget meeting. I'll have to quarrel and threaten people again." Jing Jiao had heard many stories and knew that he had to bear the responsibility at this time. He asked emotionlessly, "How expensive?" Shen Yunmai asked after some thought. 7 battleships of the latest model." Jingjio knew a lot of things, but he had no concept of the value of resources. After thinking about it, he realized that it was indeed expensive. The price is not a problem. Shen Yunmai looked at the drumstick in his hand and suddenly lost his appetite. Of course, his body's need for food was a simulated program. He threw the drumstick down the cliff and said while puffing his cheeks, "It's because I think it's boring to fight." The Central Star Fleet had conducted a maneuver by the edge of the Sea of Dark Matter. Nominally, it was to prepare for the future Star Chain plan. In fact, it was to let the soldiers on the fleet get used to this kind of fighting style. Nobody had expected that 17 battleships would be attacked by the Sea of Dark Matter. Or in other words, they had expected it but hadn't predicted it. 20,000 soldiers turned into monsters and attacked their own fleet. It was a simple statement, but it turned out to be an unimaginable disaster in reality. The chaos grew more violent, and the fleet was severely damaged. In order to prevent the storm from affecting a larger area, Shen Yunmai had no choice but to take action in person. He led hundreds of military swordsmen in armor to fight against the monsters in the space. The price he paid was the death of more than 100 swordsmen and one of his arms. His arm could be repaired, just like any other part of his body. The problem was that the damage had indeed happened in his spiritual world. The high peaks of planet 857 were concentrated near the equator. This mountain was very high. The cliff edge where Jingjio and Shen Yunmai sat was about 7,000 meters above the ground. The meter was the standard unit for measuring distance in the Federation of the Milky Way. Nobody knew why it was called meter. Those who knew it might have disappeared in the long river of history. The drumstick left Shen Yunmai's long and handsome fingers and fell to the ground after a long time in the cold air, making a pa sound. The gravity on this planet was weaker than that on the main planet. The sound of a drumstick falling to the ground could be heard from 7,000 meters away. It was because Jingjio and Shen Yunmai were the strongest humans on this planet, if they could be counted as humans. If this planet still has some living spores, how long do you think it will take for this drumstick to become a monster? All of a sudden, Shen Yunmai raised a very strange and even absurd question. Jingjio had not attended classes in vain these days. He knew that the infection did not only affect living things, but also the organic matter. He said, most of the spores exist in the form of a small group of bacteria. If one of them is alive, all of them will be alive. The number of the spores varies from hundreds to tens of thousands. It will only take 2 hours for the spores to become a monster. That's right. That's why I often think that it's fortunate that the infection happened fast enough. Otherwise, many tragedies would have taken place according to human morality. Having said that, Shen Yunmai looked at the stars in the night sky expressionlessly. It seemed that he found many things very boring. It was easy to understand what he meant. For example, when his daughter was infected, her family could do nothing but watch her turn into a monster. She also knew that death, or something even more horrible than death, was waiting for her. She would have a mental breakdown and go crazy. She would crawl along the data cable from the 3rd floor to the ground and scream, cry, and laugh in the street in her pajamas. Of course, it was also possible that her throat would be slit by her brother with a knife before she could do anything. Then, the police car or the ambulance would arrive. Her brother would raise his hands and shout that he was innocent and brave, and he would wink at his parents to prove his innocence. Jingjio could understand it, but he did not care too much about it. It was because such things happened all the time in the life community. It was only because some unexpected incidents happened too frequently that they attracted more attention. As a result, it became an ethical issue, a moral issue, and even a social issue that was worth discussing. Shen Yunmai said, I like talking with you because you know what I mean. I'm not like those people who always talk too much nonsense and end up talking like chickens and ducks. Jingjio replied, Shen Yunmai couldn't help but laugh when he thought of his response at the beginning of the conversation. While laughing, he left the cliff's edge and flew toward the night sky, leaving a trail of blue light in his wake. The light was filled with intense and seemingly substantial energy waves. Jingjio did some calculations and figured that it should be a superparticle nuclear power furnace. Go back and have a good rest. I'll take you to see a person and some stars tomorrow. The mass of blue light flew out of the atmosphere and headed toward a battleship. Shin Yunmai's voice was still echoing between heaven and earth. Sound was the sound wave produced by the vibration of an object. It needed a medium to transmit. His voice could penetrate the vacuum, which meant that there must be some kind of particle in the vacuum, or the sound wave had mutated into another form. There were many problems that needed to be solved, such as this and others. Many problems could not be solved until the end. As a result, some predecessors believed that there was no such thing as reason in the universe. Jingjio did not accept this view. His Tao did not accept this kind of nihilism. The next morning, the sky was still dark. Of course, there was not much difference between day and night on planet 857. It was difficult to see the moment of dawn. Jingjio did not wait for Huaxi. He brewed an iron pot of tea by himself. The tea was not strong, but it was perfect to his taste. It was much better than Guqing's. After drinking half a cup of tea, Jingjio walked out of the room and saw Shin Yunmai leaning against the wall. His left arm had been restored to its original state. Jingjio took a look at it and confirmed that the new arm's mechanical structure, microelectric induction, and material strength were the same as before. It seemed that he had not had enough time to modify it because he was in a hurry. A real master did not depend on whether he would turn around to look at the explosion, but on whether he needed to sleep or not. Neither Jingjio nor Shin Yunmai needed to sleep. The experts and scholars in the research institute were also freaks who seldom slept. Along with the beeping sound, the authorization was confirmed. They walked into the research institute and saw the brightly lit laboratories and the scholars whose heads were even brighter than the lights. Professor Long's head was also very bright. Jingjio did not even look at him. He followed Shin Yunmai into the meeting room. Someone was already waiting for them in the meeting room. It was a middle-aged professor. His eyes were calm like the spring breeze, and he looked amiable. But if one looked more carefully, one would find something special about him. It was obvious that this middle-aged professor had been seriously injured recently. The smell of the psychotropic drug and genetic recombination materials was very pungent, even more pungent than the smell of alcohol on Huaxi. Jingjio said, "I didn't expect to see you so early, Mr. Zheng." Chapter 861. Jingjio didn't mind the unpleasant smell on this middle-aged professor. He didn't block his senses either. He respected both Yamatai and this person. Sengju was the 7th house master of Yamatai. He was the most respected sage in the history of Chaotian. He had a noble character, an extraordinary bearing, and a caring heart, even better than Bu Xiao. He had ascended more than 7,000 years ago. It was said that the first Grand Master of the Guoqing Temple founded the Zen sect after receiving his instruction. Jingjio recognized him because of the game, The Path Toward Heaven. In the game, Sengju had stayed in the 1,000-mile windy corridor for too long, which triggered the calculation program he had set up and was selected by the big data processing system. As Jingjio and General Li conversed in the art gallery of the South Pole on the main planet, Ran Handong was certain that Sengju and another ascendant were monitoring them outside the atmosphere. Then, he left with the fleet. He should have come to the Sea of Dark Matter. Jingjio felt surprised, as he didn't expect the other party to appear in front of him so easily. Sengju didn't expect the other party to know him, shooting a glance at Shin Yunmai. Shin Yunmai exclaimed with raised eyebrows, "Don't look at me like that. I'm not your student. I didn't say anything." He was the son of the Grand Master of Aoyama, and his cultivation state was not inferior to these ascendants. As such, he didn't show any courtesy to the likes of General Li and Sengju. Sengju smiled and asked Jingjio, "Immortal, you said it was early. What did you think you could see me? When we fight." It was true that Jingjio didn't have the habit of lying, except when it was unnecessary to do so. He had prepared for the worst during the trip to the 857 base. Unexpectedly, one of the opponents he had prepared had already appeared in front of him before he could put the things he had prepared to use. Sengju understood what Jingjiu meant, saying, "Any schemes and fights caused by different paths are a foolish waste of resources under the circumstances. The sages, the ascendants, and that person were all the wisest and most outstanding beings in the world. They could, of course, figure it out and ensure that the human society wouldn't go astray. The problem was that in human history, the divergence of paths was often forcefully bestowed with some sacred meaning on a spiritual level, which then led to unimaginably stupid consequences. The shamans and the Union government share the same goal as us." Sung Ju said, "The sea of dark matter, and those monsters don't have self-awareness, and they won't accept the surrender of the humans. This is our greatest fortune." This sentence was very realistic, so it was very real. If the sea of dark matter were the evil empire depicted in the literature and art, the human civilization would have been in a state of internal strife since the ancient times and would have disintegrated and destroyed itself before the arrival of the enemy. Jingjiu understood this when he was at the hot spring, which was why he accepted General Li's invitation to have a look. This journey, as well as the studies he had done in the past few days and the inspection work that followed, were actually the inspection of him by General Li, Sengju, and the other ascendants of the previous generation. It was still an inspection. He didn't like it. Sung Ju saw his displeasure and said, "This is the last time." Jingjiu asked why. Sung Ju let out a smile, saying nothing. Hearing this, Shinyamai couldn't help but roll his eyes. Jingjiu destroyed the battleship, killed the immortal Qi Song, wounded him severely in the building of the military headquarters, and confronted General Li in the South Pole. It was all for the purpose of inspecting this matter. It was merely a trivial matter, and he didn't suffer any losses. Why do you keep mentioning it like a naggy ant? "I have another question," said Jingjiu. During the course of the study, he had raised many questions to the most outstanding specialists in various fields of human civilization. The last question he raised was what weapon the distant ancient civilization had used to destroy Planet 857. Sung Ju was aware of this, saying, "There should be an answer to this question. General Li will tell you in person." "What should we do next?" asked Jingjiu. This saint had just joined hands with Shun Yunmai to fight against the nuclear fleet of the planet. He was severely wounded and had no time to treat his wounds, so he came to the 857 base to meet Jingjiu. "It must be an important matter. Though you don't like it, this inspection of you is over." Sung Ju continued while looking at Jingjiu. "You'll see the real secret, and it might be the only answer for the humans. Secrets could be classified into many levels. The real secret needed more protection." When they walked out of the meeting room, they found that the Research Institute had been cleared. The laboratories on both sides of the passageway were sealed off from the outside. There was no one in the passageway, and all the monitoring devices had been disabled. Shin Yunmai still wore an indifferent expression on his face. It seemed that he was not interested in the secret, or in other words, he didn't think highly of the plan the Ascendants had worked so hard on for so many years. There was a wall at the end of the alloy passageway. There was neither an elevator nor a spaceship behind the wall. There was only a dark and bottomless hole leading to the deeper part of the planet. Sung Ju jumped into the hole and soon disappeared. The old guys think this is the simplest and most effective safety measure. Nobody can pass through the underground passageway of several thousand miles except for themselves. You know, the deeper one goes into the center of the planet, the hotter it gets. The bodies of the local swordsmen haven't been tempered by the fairy energy, so they can't bear the heat. Moreover, there are some traps in the passageway that only the Ascendants can understand. Shun Yunmai continued in a mocking tone, "But I feel that they regard it as a rabbit hole in a fairy tale and think that they can find a beautiful new world after jumping into it." Jingjiu didn't like Shun Yunmai's sarcastic way of talking because Zhuo Ruzhui was too annoying. "You go first," he said. Shun Yunmai complained. "You're as boring as my father. Are the people of the Aoyama sect all so boring?" "Let's go," said Jingjiu. Shen Yunmai felt that he didn't appreciate Jing Jiao as much as before, so he jumped into the hole. Jing Jiao followed him. It was pitch black in the passageway, devoid of any light. But it didn't take long for light to appear. The shapeless barrier formed a transparent column. Countless streams of lava gushed out like tidewater and slapped on the outside of the column. It was a shocking scene. Jing Jiao looked at the fiery red ocean of lava and sensed the warmth on the other side, feeling a sense of familiarity. The lava and the mantle passed quickly, and the light disappeared again. Jing Jiao didn't do anything. He just kept falling downward, following the guidance of gravity, into the seemingly endless darkness. The shapeless barrier that formed the transparent wall was obviously a Taoist magic treasure. The passageway was filled with the wills of sword and the energy of talismans. Some of the talismans were still in the process of dispersing, which should be the means Tsang Ju used to clear the way. As for the wills of sword, they must have been dispelled by Shen Yunmai. Judging from the fragments of sword breath that fell like pink raindrops, he had dispelled them perfectly. Jing Jiao had to admit that this child's mastery of the inherited heaven sword was better than his. But it was nothing. From Lu Xi to Mo Qi, Guinan Shan, Rizhui, and Lu Shui, many disciples of the Aoyama sect had mastered the inherited heaven sword better than Jing Jiao. All of a sudden, light appeared in front of him again. His line of sight passed through the transparent barrier and looked toward the source of light in the distance. He vaguely saw a large, semicircular building. It was unknown what material it was made of, but it could easily withstand the high temperature and high pressure in this place. Countless energy nodes appeared in the compact geological structure, looking like stars. Energy fluctuations could be vaguely sensed from them. It seemed that this was the super energy furnace left by the distant civilization. Those energy nodes indicated that wireless transmission was indeed the mainstream technical standard in those days. The light disappeared again. Jing Jiao continued to fall downward. Gradually, he saw Shen Yunmai's white robe. He didn't swing back and forth like a pendulum as depicted in the sci-fi novels. Relying on the formation, he stopped on a cliff somewhere. He was in the center of the earth, but he couldn't feel the temperature and pressure that should be there. There was nothing special about the place as far as his sight could reach. The only peculiar scene was probably the floating stones outside the cliff. There was a gate on the cliff. Tsang Ju pressed his palm on the bronze mirror beside the gate, and it sunk slightly. Along with a heavy but smooth sound of friction, the gate opened slowly, revealing another deep and gloomy passageway. There were many cells on both sides of the deep and gloomy passageway. The stone walls and the superalloy doors were attached with electric currents, particle turbulence nets, and powerful formations. Jing Jiao had never seen some of these formations before. Jing Jiao thought of the sword jail at the bottom of the Shangda Peak. The prisoners locked in these cells should be more formidable than those demons and devilmen of the underworld in the sword jail. Tsang Ju walked toward the other end of the passageway. He didn't pay attention to the deathly stillness and destructive intent behind the alloy doors, nor did he give any introduction to Jing Jiao. He knew that Jing Jiao should be able to guess what was behind the doors. Without a doubt, the prisoners locked here were the beings infected by the darkness, namely, those formidable monsters. Jing Jiao thought that the dead dog should like living here because he hadn't eaten these new species yet. And this passageway was very spacious, so it didn't feel like walking through a dog hole. If the dangerous monsters were locked in the cells on both sides of the passageway, what was at the end of the passageway? Jing Jiao followed the two of them to the end of the passageway. It didn't take long for him to walk out of the passageway and arrive at another platform on the cliff. There was a large space in front of the platform on the cliff, filled with a faint gray fog. No mountain peak could be seen intermittently in the fog. A gust of wind blew over from somewhere, dispersing the fog and revealing a patch of starry sky. The WeChat Q&A questions will be collected until tomorrow night. Everybody, hurry up. The questions have expired, and you have to wait for the next one. Chapter 862. They were at the center of the earth. The flat cliffs, the passageways, and this space were all man-made, so it was hard for a wind with a clear purpose to come into being naturally. Jingjiu knew it was Tsangju's magic, but he calculated it without looking at Tsangju. He was certain that this sage was very powerful and was only slightly weaker than himself. The fog had dispersed, revealing the dazzling starry sky. Innumerable stars appeared in this huge space. Of course, it was not real. It was a kind of simulation. Jingjiu found the ocean of stars familiar, and he soon realized that it was the star chart of the local galaxy that he had seen many times. There were at least hundreds of billions of stars in the sky, which looked like a real picture in front of the three of them. Humans and other intelligent beings could easily develop a feeling of awe when they looked up at the starry sky, but most of the time, they chose to ignore it. The starry sky was too far away from the human world to affect their busy and arduous life in the human world. Shun Yunmai and Tsengju were not ordinary people, but humans of the highest level. So they often thought about the relationship between themselves and the universe. The universe would not laugh at their thoughts. It just looked at them calmly and indifferently, which made them feel the fragility and insignificance of life, and then a strong feeling of emptiness arose in them. When I came here for the first time, I was shocked by this ocean of stars for a long time, and then I felt sad for a long time. Looking at the starry sky outside the cliff, Shun Yunmai said with a complicated expression, "It was like the time when I was in the hot spring when I was little." Jingjiu said, "It's indeed tiring to travel on a journey without a destination. This is the star chart of the local galaxy left by the distant ancient civilization." According to what that person said and the archaeological findings, the center of every habitable planet of the distant ancient civilization had such a star chart. However, most of the habitable planets were destroyed in that war, and the star charts of the places like the Stargate base had also vanished. Sung Ju continued, "These star charts are the real-time reflections of the real universe. In other words, this place should be called a large observatory. There were indeed many secrets on this planet, including the materials he had read on the Scorching Sun battleship." "What's the answer?" asked Jingjiu. In the meeting room of the Research Institute, Tsangju said that he had passed the inspection and could learn the biggest secret, which was the real answer of the human race. Tsangju raised his arm and pointed to a remote place outside the cliff. As his fingertip pointed, the universe there became brighter, making it easier to observe. This starry sky was a real-time reflection of the real universe. Naturally, there are not only stars but also various astronomical objects such as black holes and planets. The local galaxy that spanned 10 million light-years had become a star map in the core of the planet. Naturally, it had shrunk countless times. Whether it was the giant stars or the black holes, they were just bright or dark spots in a mathematical sense. It was even more impossible to see the existence of any planets. Logically speaking, the nebula was hard to see due to its thinness, but at this moment, it became a little more conspicuous. The space there was brightened, and the nebula blocked the light of the star behind it, so the core became darker, and the edge was like a burning flame. The nebula was light blue. Of course, this was a simulation of visible light. Its biggest characteristic was that it was extremely huge. It was hard to imagine how it was formed in the first place. Jingjiu knew about this nebula. Back when he was collecting data and knowledge on the Starfield network, he had many questions about this nebula. Looking at the nebula from the perspective of Planet 857 that day, Jingjiu had more questions, and he had also vaguely understood something. The nebula had two large projecting surfaces, which were thousands of light-years long. It was unclear how many dusts and broken pieces were hovering in the middle of the nebula in silence. The light blue light shot out from the projecting surfaces. It looked like a blue butterfly when seen from a distance. Jingjiu had seen this butterfly in many places, like the place where the assassin in overalls sat and the bookmark in General Lee's office. The ascendants like General Lee thought that they were the evolved humans and the chosen saviors of the world. Chowdian was probably a shelter in a laboratory arranged by that god, or a cocoon. They called themselves the cocoon breakers and used the butterfly as their symbol. Now that he thought about it, it should have something to do with this patch of blue nebula. Sung-ju asked, "You should have learned a great deal after coming to this world, and you've learned a great deal of history and information over the last few days. Have you thought of a way to defeat the Sea of Dark Matter?" "No," replied Jingjio, who had discussed this issue with Hua Shi. If they couldn't figure out a way in the end, they had no choice but to flee, even though the journey was hopeless and had no destination. The human civilization will never be able to eliminate the threat of the Sea of Dark Matter by relying solely on defense. It's because the invasion of the darkness is soundless, and we have no idea how to defend against it. The distant ancient civilization had attempted the interstellar migration, such as strengthening the walls and clearing the fields, but it was proven to be ineffective in the end. It was because the Sea of Dark Matter was expanding too fast. What should we do then? In order to solve the problem of the Sea of Dark Matter, we have to start from the root and block up those cracks in the dimension space. We all know that the cracks in the dimension space can be eroded at a temperature higher than 7 million degrees, and the central temperature of the nuclear bombs can meet this condition. However, once the cracks in the dimension space appear, they will span the length of the entire planetary system. It will take too much energy to use the nuclear bombs to destroy them. Even though the distant ancient civilization had almost unlimited resources, they still couldn't do it. Sung-ju went on, "Fortunately, there are countless nuclear bombs exploding in our universe." Jingjio knew that he was referring to the stars. Innumerable stars had been burning in the universe for billions of years, and the burning process would continue until they died of natural causes. It seemed that there were innumerable nuclear bombs exploding in those burning stars. The problem was that they were two different things. Jingjio said, "The stable stars can absorb the energy on the surface, but they can't utilize the energy in their cores. And the temperature on the surface of most stars is far lower than the temperature needed to destroy the cracks in the space." Sung-ju said while looking at Jingjio calmly and earnestly, "As such, we need to make the stars unstable until they break apart or explode in the end." "Weapons of a star state?" asked Jingjio. The weapons of the star state were weapons that could destroy a star or use a star as a weapon. This definition was simple and even crude, but it was daunting. "That's right," said Sung-ju. "It's an arrogant and crazy idea," remarked Jingjio. It was true that this idea was indeed crazy. Making many stars explode in the universe and wiping out those cracks in the dimension space was like a story in science fiction. Anyone in the Federation of the Milky Way who had heard of this plan would be so shocked that they might even pass out. Jingjio said, "Even if we have the weapons of the star state, it's still hard to succeed. The distant ancient civilization did it. More precisely, it was that god who did it. Though the whole civilization perished together with the Sea of Dark Matter, the darkness didn't come back to the universe for more than 100,000 years." Sung-ju continued, "With the help of that god, we have recovered some information and figured out how that god did it. That patch of nebula is not the trace left by the explosion of a supernova, nor is it born in any other normal way. There used to be a patch of starry sky there. Countless stars were burning there in silence, emitting light and heat and illuminating the beautiful human world. As Jingjio narrated, the patch of blue nebula grew brighter, as if countless stars were being born in it. It was the most prosperous and concentrated region of the distant ancient civilization. It was also the place where the Sea of Dark Matter first appeared. At the last moment of the distant ancient civilization, that god ignited all the stars. The Sea of Dark Matter disappeared, and the civilization was disrupted. A corner of the universe recovered its tranquility, except that a blue butterfly appeared there. It's not a science fiction story, it's a xinxia story. Don't take it too seriously. It's like the spy story is not a science fiction story, but a martial arts story. I was so bored during the 1-month confinement that I started playing TikTok again to watch the spy stories. I found that they were really interesting. Chapter 863. What a spectacular scene it would be if tens of thousands of stars exploded at the same time. If there were intelligent beings at the edge of the universe, they would be able to see the brightness in that moment, though it would happen hundreds of millions of years later. Looking at the nebula dimming again, Jingjiao remained silent for a long time. Planet 857 was located at the edge of the galaxy, close to the sea of dark matter and the Blue Nebula. The light, heat, and radiation ejected by tens of thousands of exploding stars couldn't destroy the protective shield. How did a planet like the Stargate base survive the explosion? If there were any humans hiding on these planets at the time, they would have died in that moment. No, they would have died in a few years or a few decades. It was more likely that they had been notified by God, or they had observed the electromagnetic outburst. As a result, they boarded the fleet and headed toward the vast and hopeless universe. Jingjiao didn't know why he was thinking of all this. Looking at the huge nebula in silence, he uttered all of a sudden. Looking at the galaxy where the Federation of the Milky Way was located, this nebula looked more like a seashell than a butterfly. As such, this nebula was given a beautiful name, the Seal of the Sea. The seashell was the seal of the sea. It turned out that the sea was the sea of stars. On his way to the main planet from the Stargate, Jingjiao had passed by the Seal of the Sea and ignited many nuclear bombs there, destroying a new battleship and killing the immortal Chi Song. He had paid attention to the Seal of the Sea many times before that. He had many questions about this nebula, like those astrophysicists and amateur astronomers. The Seal of the Sea was too large, and the background radiation was unimaginably strong. The smooth rules of physics seemed to have lost their effect during the birth of this nebula. Viewed from the distant battleships, the observation points on various planets and the space stations, this patch of nebula looked like a large hole in the cluster of stars, looking unnatural in every way. It was not until now that he knew the reason. This patch of nebula was not formed naturally. There had been 30,000 stars here, and it was unclear how many planets were inhabited by humans. All of them had perished together with the sea of dark matter more than 100,000 years ago, becoming a ray of light that illuminated the universe. Sung Ju said, "The information is incomplete. We don't know what kind of situation the humans were in at the time and how large the sea of dark matter was. But one thing is certain. Most of the galaxies of the distant ancient civilization were surrounded by the sea of dark matter, like isolated islands, with no chance of survival." "Go on," said Jingjiao. Sung Ju said, "With history as a guide, we need to prepare in advance." Having said that, he of the sea of the sea of the stars. Countless runes floated out of his sleeves and turned into golden fragments in front of his slender fingers. The starry sky slowly shifted, of stars of the star of time, as the human beings were revived, and of human beings. The sea of dark matter reappeared along with the recovery of the human civilization, and the main space it occupies is here. Sung Ju's statement was widely accepted by the current scientists, and it had indirectly given rise to those who had surrendered and those who were extreme pastoral. The sea of dark matter and those life forms it has infected have no intelligence and self-awareness. All they have is the instinct of devouring. Yet this instinct has an innate calculating ability, which is almost like the Tao. After hundreds of years of observation and calculation, we have come to a bad conclusion. The sea of dark matter will enshroud this galaxy in about 300 years. Jingjiao said, "There is still enough space in this galaxy." Sung Ju said, "If the humans only migrate to the inner part of this galaxy, like what the distant ancient civilization tried to do in the early stage, the sea of dark matter will expand faster and faster until it occupies the whole galaxy." Though it sounded hard to imagine, it had already happened and was happening in fact. The sea of dark matter was not a concrete object, and occupying it was not like sending troops to land on it. To describe it in a more understandable way, it was a kind of space. However, in comparison to the space of the main universe, the physical rules here were completely different. Any life form that entered the space would be transformed into a dark monster. If the sea of dark matter expanded to the whole galaxy, it meant that the physical rules in the galaxy would be changed. The humans and other life forms would have no choice but to die, and it was impossible for them to escape. 857 and the Stargate base have been preserved until now, which means that the distant galaxies are not affected much when the permanent star explodes. Sometimes we wonder if the distant ancient civilization likes to empty the planets because of this plan. In short, since the humans will be forced to migrate to another galaxy 300 years later, why don't they do it earlier? The humans in the Federation of the Milky Way intended to migrate to another galaxy. Though it sounded like a magnificent and difficult undertaking, it was actually not difficult to accomplish. The main body of the human civilization was the 3 interplanetary fleets. They could migrate freely in the galaxy as long as they had enough resources, ores, and automatic machines, like the nomads in the stories. It seemed that General Lee and the others were not interested in the government of the Federation of the Milky Way and the rule of the planets. It turned out that they had been preparing for it a long time ago. The only regret was that the human civilization could only migrate to the local galaxy by means of the warped space-time holes. They couldn't migrate to the real universe outside. Otherwise, the threat of the sea of dark matter would be nothing. Shin Yunmai took over the task of explaining. He was the commander of the Central Star Fleet, so he was more familiar with the details of the task. The 3 fleets used the nuclear bombs to set up a large net to lock down the sea of dark matter. The so-called Star Chain Plan is merely a show for the populace. It's impossible to believe it. He took out a thick tobacco from somewhere and put it in his mouth. He snapped his fingers and ignited it with the sword fire. Our real plan is to ignite these stars like that god after the humans migrate to the neighboring galaxy, he said vaguely. The starry sky outside the cliff was as tranquil as the real universe. Those stars were all ablaze and didn't need to be ignited again, but there was no better way to describe it than to ignite them. This plan was called the Star Igniting Plan. The Star Igniting Plan had 2 major difficulties. They were not the migration of the human civilization, but the act of igniting the stars. How to ignite the stars first? Which stars would be chosen? Which stars should be chosen first? What was the order of igniting these stars? How to ensure that these stars would melt all the cracks in the dimension space and turn the sea of dark matter into nothingness after they were ignited? It sounded like a simple matter, but it was actually unimaginably complicated. In order to blow up a building, thousands of explosive points had to be calculated precisely, let alone a patch of the starry sky. How to ignite the stars? It was not the order and calculation that mattered here. It was the most important and fundamental technical issue. The Star Chain Plan was a propaganda method employed by the military to comfort the populace, and so was the weapon of the Star State. Those rumors had no basis in reality. The humans were still a great many light years away from such a level of civilization. We have 300 years to find such a weapon. Sung Ju used the word find rather than invent or create. The distant ancient civilization had reached such a level of civilization, and that God had used such a weapon. Even though that civilization had disappeared in the long river of history, it should have left many traces. Like the city on the northern plateau of the main planet, the Mecca and the museum of Shoer City, and the oil painting filled with yellow sunflowers. He continued, however, we have to complete the calculation first and be ready to carry out the plan before we can find such a weapon. Why did you tell me all this? Asked Jing Jiao. Like I told you, the old guy has given you so many benefits that he wants you to do something for him. Shen Yunmai threw the tobacco in his hand into the starry sky outside the cliff, saying, the leader of the humans and the sole talent of Aoyama, you of course have to think about it. Sung Ju added, most importantly, you have to decide the order and method of igniting the stars. Why? Asked Jing Jiao. Sung Ju said, we're willing to give you this important historical task because you're the most powerful ascendant of the human race. In other words, if Chao Tian is the laboratory of that god, you're the most suitable candidate he has chosen. Moreover, we've read the story you wrote and are aware of your ability. The greater the ability, the greater the power, the greater the responsibility. Jing Jiu had always avoided this statement, but he had to admit that it was reasonable on the level of cause and effect. What he couldn't understand was that no matter how powerful his calculation ability was and how he could calmly judge the gains and losses and the lives and deaths of billions of people, there were obviously better candidates in this universe. It was the young female priest by the hot spring. Sang Ju said, "That person is still too cold and devoid of warmth." "I don't understand," said Jing Jiu. Shen Yunmai rubbed the remaining tobacco smell on his fingers and said, "They think that her thinking mode is more like that of a mechanical being and not creative enough." Sang Ju said, "You should know that it's not enough to complete the mathematical model and get the final result by relying on supercomputers. It's more important to rely on the intuition of life." "Intuition is the probability," said Jing Jiu. Shen Yunmai said, "I had the same thought as you before. I thought that neither you nor I were as suitable as that person, but I think it's worth a try after reading your mind." Jing Jiu pressed, "Is it because of your calculating ability and the perception of the Tao heart?" Shen Yunmai shrugged and said to him, "No, it's because of the game of Go that you and Tong Yen played in Jiaoga City." Looking at the outside of the cliff and the billions of stars, Jing Jiu had a familiar feeling again. It was not because he was familiar with the relative positions of the stars or the star chart, but because he was familiar with the entire starry sky. Besides the stars, there was nothing but a dark space in the starry sky. The sea of dark matter couldn't be seen, but it was spreading out in those spaces like the dark night. It turned out to be like this. Back at the plum meeting in Jiaoga City, he played a game of Go with Tong Yen. That mountain was called the Chessboard Mountain. That game of Go shocked the whole world and stirred up the wind and rain. As far as he was concerned, playing Go was meaningless because it was too simple. To prove this point, he set up a Go game for Tong Yen. Hundreds of Go pieces flew out from the Go board and the urns, forming a three-dimensional Go game in the air, which was extremely complicated. He saw such a Go game again, but it was tens of thousands of times more complicated than the one in Jiaoga City. The stars were the white Go pieces. The sea of dark matter was the black Go pieces. If one held the white Go pieces, what should one do next? Chapter 864. A scene had occurred in the pavilion on the Chessboard Mountain in Jiaoga City many years ago. Hundreds of black and white Go pieces hovered in the air, forming a complicated structure, which was witnessed by Hejan, Kane Yang, and many other cultivation practitioners. This scene was often described in one word. The stars were scattered all over the chess pieces. The chess pieces were like the stars of the time. The starry sky was like the chess pieces. In fact, compared to the chess game, Jing Jiu had a more familiar activity to describe this problem: the sandpiling game. He often slept on the bamboo chair from the small village to the Aoyama sect. The ceramic plate would appear by the bamboo chair from time to time, and he would put a grain of sand on it every once in a while, until it became a picturesque scene of mountains and rivers. Could he use this method on this patch of starry sky? Jing Jiu had told Tong Yen that he couldn't even calculate all the variations of this chess game, let alone this patch of starry sky. He had also told Tong Yen that the cultivation practitioners pursued the impossible. But was it possible to achieve the impossible? This patch of starry sky was, of course, much more complicated than the structure formed by the black and white Go pieces and the grains of sand on the plate. There were tens of thousands of permanent stars in the area where the humans were active. How complicated would the chess game be if the range was extended to the entire local galaxy? The supercalculation was indeed of little help in solving this problem. As Sang Ju said, the final decision would be based on the intuition that was close to metaphysics. Was what Tong Yen said right? It would be better if he could come out. Jing Jiu said to Tsing Ju, "Even if we can succeed, the sea of dark matter will appear as the human civilization advances. It's meaningless." The warped holes were right there, like a treasure hidden in an unguarded storage room. Who could refrain from using it? If they didn't enter the warped holes and didn't use the gravitational field and the high-energy particles, there would be fewer cracks in the space between the dimensions, and the sea of dark matter would take shape much later. However, if they did so, the humans would be locked on the planets forever. Who would accept it except for the extreme pastoral group? He wouldn't accept it. If a thing didn't develop, progress, and change, it was no different from death. However, if the humans continued to advance based on their courage, wisdom, and the spirit of exploration like they did in the distant ancient civilization or in the Federation of the Milky Way, they would inevitably enter these realms, and the sea of dark matter would appear. He did not know how it would be in other parts of the universe, but in this galaxy, it seemed to be an endless cycle of life. Sangju said, "Destroying the sea of dark matter will buy more time for the humans. At least they won't be sealed off in 300 years. Next, we will try to slow down the speed of civilization temporarily, trying to extend this process to more than 10,000 years. Then, humans will send a super fleet to the periphery of the galaxy to conduct various experiments, hoping to find a fundamental solution. At the same time, scientists will conduct more theoretical experiments." Jingjiu didn't wait for him to finish and said calmly, "Don't talk nonsense." Shen Yimai's face was also full of mockery. His opinion was the same as that of Jingjiu. He believed that the ideas of the previous ascendants were in a mess and could not possibly be realized. How much power would it take to forcibly slow down the advancement of civilization? How many people would die if the energy of the civilization exploded? The experiments carried out by the super fleet in the periphery of the galaxy would open up the cracks in the dimensional space. Wouldn't the sea of dark matter pose a threat to the humans if it was far away? Would the super fleet be abandoned? What the hell was the theoretical experiment? Any monkey with a basic knowledge of science would know that it would be a dead end if they did so. The plan to ignite the permanent star was still a pavilion built in the sky. It was no different from talking nonsense to talk about the follow-up. Jingjiu had no desire to listen to the plan any longer. He went back to the ground with Shen Yunmai. Walking in the passageway, his line of sight passed through the French window and saw the well-preserved city. It suddenly occurred to him that the pavilions of the distant ancient civilization were built in the sky. After coming back to the suite, he came to the window on the other side and looked at the black barren land. While she put the iron kettle on the stove and threw herself onto the sofa, she started playing games, paying no attention to Jingjiu's mood at the moment, nor did she ask him what he had done that day. Jingjiu knew that she wouldn't ask him, so he kept thinking about those things. There was a saying in the Zen sects, 1 drink and 1 peck. It turned out that the Go game in Zhaoga City, the sand table by the bamboo chair, and the stars in the night sky had such a connection and correspondence. Was this the destiny or the heavenly secret? Or was it the arrangement that God had made when he built the laboratory in Chaotian? Planet 857 was located at the edge of the local galaxy. Many stars could be seen in the sky, though they were not very bright. The whole picture of the local galaxy could be seen from here. Of course, it required a very good telescope or a pair of eyes like Jingjiu's. Looking at the indistinct nebula, Jingjiu remained silent for a long time. He had often looked up at the starry sky on the deck of the Stargate Hotel, and he had noticed this patch of nebula. After hearing the story that day, the patch of nebula had a different meaning. It had become a hole in the local galaxy. It was the wound of the distant ancient civilization. In the next moment, his line of sight shifted to a remote spot in the night sky, where there was a white permanent star with an ordinary brightness that could be easily missed. It was the real sun outside Chaotian, located between the Hyene Nebula and the Federation of the Milky Way. The three of them formed a stable spatial structure. The former sea of dark matter was inside. The current sea of dark matter was outside. That was why there was a legend about the heavenly demons of the outside world in Chaotian, and why the Ascendants encountered so many dangers when they came to the universe. Fortunately, The heavenly demons of the outside world couldn't break through the boundary between the two worlds with different speeds of light, so they couldn't invade Chaotian. As Jingjiu was thinking of all this, a faint buzzing sound could be heard in the night sky, followed by a slight tremor on the ground. The glass window in front of him was slightly deformed, and the lights and starlight of the circular base became distorted. Hua Shi, who was playing a game, lifted her head and found that Jingjiu had disappeared from the window. All that could be seen was the gentle wind blowing the steam coming out from the iron kettle. No one was running on the dark and desolate barren land, and there was no deathly dust dragon brought up by the white cloth. There was only the buzzing sound from time to time and the faint black smoke rising from the ground. Jingjiu walked to the edge of the cliff and sat down. He lifted his head to look at the dark space. His line of sight followed the sword light moving at a high speed, calculating his speed and analyzing his strength. Shen Yunmai was the combination of two civilizations. He had a higher talent in cultivation than most of the cultivation practitioners in Chaotian, and he was more able to accept the modification of the interstellar civilization. His fighting prowess was indeed formidable. The sages had a very high status among the ascendants, but Zhengzhu might not be able to defeat him. The sword light traveled at an unimaginably high speed, traveling up and down along the edge of the atmosphere. The sword light traveled over the equator one moment, then returned to the circular base in the far north, brushing past the edge of the protective shield of the ghost city, and then returned to the space, passing through a few black battleships. It was not to show off his skills or to be bored. It was a serious experiment. Shen Yunmai needed time to adapt to the newly installed mechanical arm, and he was also testing a few weapons at the battleship level for the military, and he had a more important mission. As far as the regular folks were concerned, he was the most important young master in the Federation of the Milky Way. As far as the swordsmen were concerned, he was a weirdo, and as far as the military was concerned, he was a fleet. Jingjiu noticed that the sword light contained a faint light of a different color. He took a closer look at it and was certain that the light came from his waist. That was why. The swordsmen in the starry sky couldn't conquer the starry sky just because they were too far away. Even Jingjiu himself had a hard time traveling across the vast ocean of stars. It was because the permanent stars were too far away and the fairy energy was not enough. How could a cultivation practitioner travel freely in the universe? The answer was not to ride the battleships, which was the least interesting of all. The real answer was the superparticle transformation of the nuclear power furnaces. The ascendants had been tempered by the fairy energy, so they didn't need to worry about the radiation. The superparticle transformation of the nuclear power furnaces had been the main focus of the scientific circle in the Federation of the Milky Way, but few people knew that it was based on the needs of the ascendants. At least 70 universities of various sects had formed a group to tackle the problem. Though they had made great progress in the past few decades, they hadn't found any useful results. Seeing the experiment conducted by Shen Yunmai, Jingjiu realized that the miniature nuclear power furnaces had succeeded a long time ago. Thinking of the huge energy furnace he had seen in the passageway at the center of the planet that day, Jingjiu instinctively thought that it had something to do with the miniature nuclear power furnaces. Planet 857 had the most relics of the distant ancient civilization, which could be of great help to the newborn humans. This also explained why the Immortal Tan was willing to take the risk and come here incognito. There were many cultivation states for the Immortal Tan, and the Great Immortal Tan was in heaven and earth. The Immortal Tan was well aware of this, so he wouldn't miss the opportunity to obtain the miniature nuclear power furnaces. The sword light broke through the atmosphere and headed toward the peak of the mountain. The air was compressed at a high speed, giving off a whistling sound. Shen Yunmai halted by the cliff's edge. Noticing Jingjiu's gaze, he asked, "The experiment has just begun. Do you want to give it a try?" Jingjiu uttered without hesitation. Shen Yunmai issued an order to the battleship in the space. A few minutes later, a few highly achieved swordsmen of the military in combat armor flew off the battleship and carried a case into the atmosphere. They landed slowly by the cliff's edge and flew back to the space after putting the case down. The case had a dark gray color. It was made of a high-density material of the highest standard. It wouldn't be vaporized in a short time, even if it was bombarded by a laser cannon. The 857 base had developed a dozen experimental superparticle nuclear power furnaces in secret over the last few years. Only 3 of them had been delivered to the military after a strict inspection. The first one was given to General Li. The second one was carried by Shun Yunmai's waist. The third one was in the case. "It was prepared for you," Shun Yunmai said to Jingjiao. "You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."